the time. My family and I went to go visit some relatives we had in a foreign country. I was born and raised in the USA, but we still go back often to visit relatives. My dad didn't want to keep paying for a hotel, so a few years back, we bought an apartment. This trip was our first time staying at the apartment. The way the apartment is set up is there's a living room where the entryway is. It was the only air-conditioned spot. My dad went back to the US to finish up some business as he was going to meet us there at a later time. So it was my mom, my 3 brothers, and I. The landlord who gave my mom the key was sort of creepy from her description, but it didn't really alarm anyone that much. Another important thing to the story is, my mom got the key and met the landlord alone since we were taking care of things at my uncle's house. It had been a few weeks and my mom couldn't stand her room since there was no air conditioning. I didn't blame her, so we all slept in the living room. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until about 4 weeks into staying there. At around 2 a.m., my mom was waking me up, but with a finger over her mouth, basically saying, "Keep quiet." My mom never does this, so I shut up and made a hand motion, asking what was going on. She pointed to the door and someone was jiggling the doorknob. We had forgotten to lock the door, but thank God my older brother got into the habit of using chain locks from his college days. It should be noted that my brother was dead asleep in another room, so I was now the oldest male. My mom was distraught and I was thinking about what to do. I was thankful that at least the chain lock was there, but I think the man on the other side noticed that that was all. I see a face pressed up from the small gap. It was the landlord. He finally gives up after about 10 minutes, or so I thought. The next thing I see is a coat hanger trying to open the chain lock. I finally decide to do something, so I body check the door, slamming it shut. I locked the actual lock and yelled in a foreign tongue, and the man seemed surprised to hear a man's voice. I guess he assumed my mom was alone and the only one to check in. He scrambled down the stairs. All said and done, he was gone by 2:30 a.m. I looked out the window across the street at the landlord's house. He just stared at me, and then turned off the lights in his house. When we woke up, I told my brother. We called the police, but they said we didn't really have any evidence. It was our word against his. My mom wasn't sure it was the landlord, but I swore it was him. I had seen him. My dad arrives 4 days later, and I told him the story. He met with the landlord and agreed he was creepy. My dad actually believed me. My mom didn't feel safe anymore, so we left that apartment the day after my dad arrived. As we drove away, the landlord gave me a little smirk and wave. By now, it was daylight.
I was a 911 dispatcher for almost 11 years. 11 long years of receiving the calls of everyone from entitled do-gooders to terrified pleading victims of serious violent crimes. I spent a long time compartmentalizing the more harrowing calls, years letting go of the pain and suffering I soaked up like a sponge during the years I spent sat in front of a switchboard computer. I've had numerous sleepless nights, countless visits to state-appointed therapists, but only one emergency call really sticks with me, one that I could never shake off or push to the back of my mind. I have a copy of the transcripts to the call, so I'll be referencing my copy to ensure my recollection of the events are as accurate as possible. This is the story of the Ashland Jane Doe. Working in more than 6,000 call centers nationwide, 911 dispatchers form the vital link between callers in distress and emergency response teams that assist them. Through efficient handling and assessment, we reduce response times and help save lives. That's the idea that got me into the career in the first place, saving lives. I'd never been particularly athletic, so a career in law enforcement or the military was never really in the cards for me. That always bothered me. I grew up intensely idealistic, and I've always had my heart set on a career where I could help people, help make the world a better place. So when I found out that I could apply to be a 911 dispatcher and help play a part of such a vital public service, I jumped at the chance. We were told that the job wasn't for everyone, that it could take a serious psychological toll on those that volunteered. I know it sounds crazy, but that only made it more appealing. It was, after all, public service, service being the operative word. It would be rough, frustrating, even depressing sometimes, but I would be providing a much-needed aid to my fellow Americans, often during the darkest, most terrifying moments of their lives. I should also add that it requires specialist training to be a police dispatcher. Being a general call taker or even an emergency medical service dispatcher is a tough gig, but a police dispatcher was a cut above, and we all knew it. Only the most intelligent, strong-willed, and decisive candidates are granted roles as police dispatchers. So naturally, I was over the moon when I passed the applicant's exam and was given a place on the training course. I was a pretty experienced member of the police dispatchers when the call from Ashland Jane Doe came through. Just a few hours into my shift, I recently returned from the break room with a flash of strong black coffee to fuel me throughout the night. You always seem to say a little prayer whenever a call is patched through, hoping it's nothing too serious, nothing too upsetting. But as soon as I heard the girl's voice, I knew it would be bad. You see, screamers are bad. You can barely hear them, they're incoherent, and basically you have to spend like the first 5 minutes of the call just getting them to breathe enough to communicate. But the worst by far are the whisperers. The whisperers call when whatever is putting them in danger is close, real close. Whisperers do so because they are in grave, imminent danger. Whisperers call because they're being hunted. 911, what is the address of your emergency? I asked. The call had already been picked up by a general call taker, patched through to me once it established that the caller needed the police. Right across from the 4th Street laundromat. There was a slight pause before the girl whispered. The fact that she didn't know exactly where she was gave me a terrible sinking feeling. This was going to be a rough one. What's the problem? I replied, trying to sound as casual as possible. Younger callers seem to respond better that way. I've been abducted. The way she sounded so calm, so matter-of-fact, it was utterly chilling. There was no hope in the girl's voice, even though she was so close now to rescue. But you're at the laundromat? I asked, consulting a map of the area. It was right in the middle of Ashland, surrounded by a commercial and residential district. She wasn't held up in some barn in the middle of nowhere despite being thoroughly disturbed. I reassured myself with the thought that this would be an easy rescue. No, I'm in the bedroom with him. Him. The words seemed to rattle around in my skull. She was in the bedroom with him. Do you know what color the house is? I tried to change the subject slightly to garner more information, sure, but also to try to keep the girl calm, keep her mind occupied. No, was all she said. This was a spanner in the works, a big one. The police can't just go kicking in the door of every apartment or house opposite the 4th Street laundromat. Yet before I could press her for more detail, she spoke again. Please hurry. My heart rate began to pick up at this point. She was obviously in danger, perhaps extreme danger. I had to remain professional and continue my assessment of the situation. Does he have a weapon? I asked, already preparing to send out an APB to muster the officers required for a rescue. Got a taser. She lowered her voice even further as she spoke, but still she didn't seem overwhelmed by fright. I considered for a moment that whoever was may have drugged the poor girl to keep her sedated. Are you injured? A little. Her whisper was haunting by the point. She sounded like she'd been driven half insane by the ordeal. Is there any way you can get out of the building? I don't know. Without waking him, I'm scared. She was broken by fear, numb with it. Is there a bathroom in the house? I remember my voice breaking. I was so scared for this poor little thing. I wanted so badly for her to just drop the phone and run. run for her life. His bedroom is closed and he made it so it would make noise. Will he do something to you? I'd never been so intense, not during my entire time as a dispatcher. Yeah, he had me tied up. Are you tied up now? Well, no, I kind of freed myself. That's my girl, I remember thinking. She was a fighter, a survivor. Oh, she suddenly said. I think I woke him. I think I woke him up. Just set the phone down. My heart was in my mouth. There was silence, what seemed like minutes of uninterrupted silence as I half expected the screams to commence. Finally, I brought myself to say something, anything down the silent phone line. Are you still there? How much longer? Was all she asked. It broke my heart. I didn't know. I just didn't know. I kept her on the line as I immediately dispatched officers to the laundromat. Luckily, there were only 2 houses immediately opposite the place in what was otherwise an industrial complex. I can't tell you how relieved I was when I finally heard the voices of the dispatch officers. They'd broken into the house of the kidnapper and were in the process of freeing the poor girl from captivity. Show me your hands. Put up your effing hands right now, do it, I heard one of them bellow. I held back tears knowing that that poor young woman was finally safe from him. She was most definitely in danger too. When the police searched the house, they found the bodies of 2 other young women that had disappeared in the months before the critical 911 call. Jane Doe is called that because her identity cannot be revealed, standard procedure for all victims of assault. Her abductor, Sean Michael Great, was found guilty of murdering Stacy Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith, and was later sentenced to death for his crimes. During the trial, he stated that despite having killed before, he had no intention of killing the kidnapped Jane Doe and was in fact intending to marry her. That's what really gets to me. The thought of the brutal, potentially short life that poor girl would have ended up living as the unwilling bride of such a murderous, unfeeling psychopath. Where she would be if she hadn't loosened her bindings, found the phone, and called in her own rescue on that fateful spring night. I remember walking out of Walmart with a cart full of gardening supplies a few years back. My mom had sprained her wrist and needed stuff picked up for the start of spring, so it was down to me to go grab some stuff for her. I'm loading the stuff into the trunk of my car when I happen to notice someone walking past me out of the corner of my eye. Kinda took me off by surprise, so I turned around out of instinct and ended up making eye contact with this younger looking guy. He looked like 20-something, workout gear, shaved head, totally normal looking guy who looked like he'd been out for a run or something. I didn't want to seem all confrontational or whatever, so I smiled and said, "Hey," and just carried on loading all the stuff into my trunk. Next thing I hear is someone saying, "Was it you?" I turn again, and it's the same guy, smiling back at me, having asked me that question. I'm like, "Was what me?" And the guy responds like, "You know." I sort of chuckle, thinking it was an honest mistake on the guy's part, thinking I was just someone else or whatever, so I tell him I don't know what he's talking about, then just carry on loading the stuff into my trunk. That's when I hear him walking towards me from his footsteps, so I turn around, hoping things aren't about to get confrontational. But those hopes were totally dashed when I saw the look on his face. He looked livid, and as I'm getting ready for the unfortunate event of having to fight a total stranger for no reason, the guy starts screaming at me. "Don't pretend you don't know. You got me transferred. It's because of you I got transferred." He said a bunch of other stuff that might have you censoring this post, so I won't repeat it, but trust me when I say it was language that would have made a stevedore blush. I remember one of the scariest things being how he was still sort of smiling as he started shouting about being transferred. And then as he carried on screaming at me, he went bright red in the face, got this look about him like he was about to murder me, and he actually started spitting as he was screaming due to how out of control he was getting. I'm telling him to calm down, that there's been some kind of mistake, and that's all without even asking what he meant by got me transferred. But then every time I try to reason with the guy, he almost takes it like I'm trying to gaslight him or whatever, and it just makes him angrier. I don't even know how he managed to conceal it on him, but he pulled out this extendable baton from somewhere and whips it open right in front of me before charging at me. I just reacted, running around my car and screaming for other people in the parking lot to call 911. That was the other scary thing, how most people just stood and watched with their mouths open instead of either calling someone or actually getting involved to help. Then the other really scary thing, the guy's screams as he chased me, they went from actual words to just this wild psychobabble, just stuff that barely made sense and only had an actual understandable word every 3 or 4 screams. He was completely manic, and it really didn't hit me at the time, but I later found out that he was suffering from a complete mental break. He was way faster than me too, so if it wasn't for me being able to duck and dodge around parked cars, he would have caught up with me in seconds. And then because I didn't have anything to defend myself with, just bags of compost and seeds and whatnot, he might have actually been able to bash my head in, and there's not a thing I've been able to do about it too. Eventually, some hero of a security guard from a movie theater of all places, he actually ran over and tried tackling the guy chasing me, but this psycho kid swung at him a few times with his baton, and then the guy was forced to back off and try to tackle him when he had his back turned, which obviously wasn't easy because the kid was in this Super Saiyan manic state. Every time he got close, the kid just clocked him, turned, and started swinging. But then that gave me a window to put some more distance between us. The guy might have actually saved my life in that way. Anyway, the cops showed up after what seemed like way too long, but when they tried tasing the guy, it just had absolutely no effect on him. That was the other thing that scared me. I've actually seen a guy getting tased before, it's a long story, and when the wire things hit him, he just seized up and hit the floor like a statue. But this guy, it just had zero effect on him. Maybe it was a broken taser or whatever, but it was still pretty terrifying to see. The cops wouldn't go into too much detail with me, but the kid was known to him as suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and I went from hating the kid to actually feeling really sorry for him incredibly fast. They'd been getting calls about him for the past 2 days, but he kept on running from the scenes of the calls and getting away before they could actually take him into custody. I don't feel any ill will towards him, and I hope he got the help that he needed. But I'm not kidding when I say he legit could have killed me that day. Easily the scariest thing that's ever happened to me at Walmart.
All of this started happening maybe about a year ago. I remember that it was really warm outside. For reference, I'm a female, and me and my husband, who we'll call Jay, have 3 kids at home. L, who was 13 at the time, H, who was 12, and G, who was 8. It was during the evening time, and it was pretty dark outside, so it must have been pretty close to 9 p.m. I was just sitting on my bed watching TV when I then heard a knock on my window that was really close to my right. The curtains on that window were open because I had a window unit running. I've always slept with those curtains open to get all the air because it's just so hot here. Jay goes directly into the backyard to check it out. The door to the backyard is in my room. It's one of those add-on rooms on smaller houses. Anyways, he goes out there, but he doesn't see anything out of the ordinary. The dog was also with him, and she didn't bark or let on that anything was off. Elle then came out of the bathroom, and she thinks that she might have heard someone knock on the bathroom window. She was covered in soap and bundled up in a towel, but we told her that we just looked and there was nothing there, so she went back to finishing her shower. No one was really that scared by this because our neighborhood is really active and people are just always outside, so we tried to reason that it was just some odd noise and then let it go. About an hour later, G had fallen asleep on the couch watching TikTok videos, H was asleep in his room, which is next to L's room, and Elle was in her room laying on her bed looking at her phone with her curtain open. Up to this point, Elle was really lax about her room's windows. I was always getting on to her for not closing her curtains and making sure that her windows were locked, and even found out that she was sleeping with her window open so that the cat had a way in and out. Jay and I were in our room watching a movie when we then heard Elle then let out the most terrifying scream I think I've ever heard in my life. It was a scream of sheer terror. Panicked, Jay and I ran to her. We meet her in the living room and she's actually so scared that she faints right there on the living room floor. Elle comes to in just a few seconds and she then tells us that someone had banged on her window and that when she looked over, she had then saw a man that was staring right at her with his hands cupped around his eyes. He didn't run when he saw her look over, he just stood there and just kept staring at her. Jay then runs to his room to get his rifle and runs out to the front yard while I get on the phone to call the cops. Jay had positioned himself right outside the house next door that had been empty for years. The neighborhood kids have been in there and they found chip bags and beer bottles before, but have never seen anyone in there. Before the cops arrive, I take the gun inside so I didn't have to answer any uncomfortable questions. The cops search my yard, the property next door, and the alley up and down the street, but they don't find anything. They tell us to just lock the doors and call them back if something else happens. I forgot to mention that by this time all of the kids are awake and know everything now. L and G were really terrified and H was just really pissed off. H has autism and just has no real sense of danger. All he knew was that his sisters and mom were scared and his dad was pissed, so he's just standing on the porch cussing up a storm into the night, daring that sneaky bastard to show his face again and vowing to kick his ass. About 2 weeks later, the person comes back just tapping, and since then it's been a pretty regular occurrence of tapping or knocking. One time he actually pretended to be a cat trying to be let in. I saw him on our porch while G saw him peeping through the window on the front door. We've called the police like they advised us, but they've never been able to catch him. We've stayed up all night waiting in Elle's bedroom and never heard it. We've hidden in my shed in the backyard and my car in the front trying to catch this person outside, but nothing works. No one can catch him. My kids either sleep in the living room or our bedroom. We don't go out after dark and we don't stay home alone. I contacted the lieutenant that is over our neighborhood. He sent officers and he's assigned a patrol for our street. Police are randomly popping up at my house to check on us and patrol. I think it's to show the people on the street that they're here and know what's going on. Whenever they come at night to visit, they always have at least 2 cars and the lights are always on in their cars. The man came back last week at 2 a.m., but Elle was just way too scared to get out of bed to wake us up. Elle is a teenager and she really likes the privacy of her room, so sometimes she sleeps in there. Since this last occurrence, Elle and G have stopped sleeping in their room, so I honestly don't know if he's been back. He's never knocked on my bedroom window since that first night. I haven't been able to buy cameras until now, and someone on Reddit actually suggested anti-climb paint, which apparently is a paint that never dries and stains whatever it touches. After posting this on Reddit and reading all of the comments and thinking about it, I think this creep lives on my street. His escape is always so quick. No matter how fast or how quickly we get outside, he's always gone. He never does it when they have friends over or when we went on vacation and my dad stayed here. He knows all of our cars and routines, and he's close enough to get away quickly. I just have no idea what to do anymore.
I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, maybe 14 or 15. I had this really crazy guy that lived on my street. Everyone called him Crazy Mike, and he really was as crazy as you could imagine, but more on him in a minute. I had this one friend that was a little wild. We'll call him Charlie. He was kind of the adventurous friend that got me to do some crazy stuff. We went through a phase for about 2 or 3 months where we hung out a lot, and it was honestly a lot of fun. One of the things we would do is explore the nearby woods. There was a lot of wildlife, and anyone could go out there and explore as far as they wanted. We lived on a mountain, and we would hike up the mountain, and when we had enough for the day, we would hike back down. We normally took the regular roads back down because it was just a little bit easier to get home that way. My friend lived a few roads up from me, so I would walk up to his house with him and then go home by myself. I remember this one particular day we had gone hiking through the creek. Bear in mind, it was freezing outside at the time. There was snow on the ground and a lot of water was frozen. At one point, we had the bright idea of walking on the ice. As you might imagine, we fell into the water. It wasn't very deep or anything, not even enough to get above our chest, but we were dripping with water, and it was about 5 degrees outside, and there was snow on the ground. But being the crazy kids we were, it didn't stop us. We just continued hiking even after we got soaking wet. I don't know if we just had a really high tolerance to the cold or it was adrenaline, and we were all good. We continued on for a couple of hours that day. But after a certain point, I finally talked him into heading home for the day. He agreed and we went out and got on the road. We made our way back down like usual. But this is the point when I started freezing. I was too cold and I knew my body. I knew that I was in some kind of danger, like getting near hypothermia or something. When we got to my friend's house, he was more than willing to let me come in and warm up for a few minutes. But just as we were getting to his house, my mom called him. She was really angry with me because I hadn't answered my phone in an hour. I tried explaining the situation to her, but she just screamed at me over and over again to come home. So I had to walk the rest of the way home, and that was that. This is where Crazy Mike comes in, because he lives one road above me, and it saves me about 10 minutes of walking if I cut through a part of his property to get to my house. He had a big fence, but so did his neighbor. There was a small walkway kind of area between the two spots. I was obviously in a rush to get back home and warm up. In fact, I was jogging most of the way. I hadn't heard anything about Crazy Mike by this point, so I figured it would be okay if I cut through his property this one time. I started going through, and that's when he came out of his house with a rifle. He pointed it at me and started screaming at me like a maniac. Of course, I turned around and sprinted away. I ran all the way back home and told my mother. She thought I was exaggerating and that I shouldn't have been cutting through people's property anyway, and that was when I started asking people around the area about him. I heard some stories about Crazy Mike and some of the things he would do. I heard that he was a conspiracy theorist, a drug dealer, criminal, felon, and a bunch of other nutty stuff. If I had to sum it all up in a single phrase, he was a bad guy. Whoever I asked never had anything good to say about him, and the part that freaked me out was that I still had to pass Crazy Mike's house on my way home. I didn't have to cut through his property, but I did still have to walk in front of his house on the road to get to my house, and that made me terribly uncomfortable. Because now I was constantly worried that I was going to get shot or something. I still would go hiking with Charlie and all that, and after a couple of times of going home, there was no incident, so I thought that that was going to be the end of it. However, I noticed something else. He had video cameras on the outside of his property looking out onto the road. I'd never noticed them before, but now that I was aware of his insanity, I paid a little bit more attention. Whenever I walked by, the cameras would follow me. What freaked me out the most was that they were manually operated cameras. They weren't the kind of cameras that just followed motion around. He was sitting there operating those cameras every single time I ever walked by, watching me. I'm not sure if he was recording all the footage or not, but he made me uncomfortable either way. I remember there was this one time when I was walking home from Charlie's house at night. It must have been about 10 or 11. It was really late, and even then, the cameras followed me as I walked by. I thought that was going to be it, that nothing else was going to happen between me and Crazy Mike. Well, I was dead wrong. It was still during the same winter season, and I was walking home during a blizzard. And that was just the kind of guy I was. My mom was going to order pizza that night, and I didn't want to miss it. I passed by Crazy Mike's like I always did, and that was when something unexpected happened. He had this giant fence, and it had to have been 15 feet tall, and it was this really thick wood. Part of it opened up, and a dog ran out after me. I couldn't tell what kind of dog it was, but it was angry and barking at me really loud, and ran after me, and I could tell that it was going to bite me as hard as it could. I got a seriously violent vibe. I was lucky that I was in really good shape and managed to sprint away, having a head start. Didn't slip or anything else either. That situation could have turned out really bad, really fast. But either way, my family ended up moving a few weeks later for unrelated reasons, My mom actually got a new job in a different state, and that was the end of my experience with Crazy Mike. Even now I wonder what his problem was. Was he some kind of drug dealer or criminal? Why was he so paranoid about some kid walking in front of his house or cutting through a piece of his property? I've asked my friend on Facebook a couple of times if he's heard anything about Crazy Mike, and apparently nothing has changed. So make of that what you will. I guess the moral of the story is that you should avoid crazy people as much as you can. Sometimes just walking in front of their house. Hey friends, if you enjoyed these stories animated by the awesome Martin Animations, but you want to hear more, be sure to head over to my channel, Let's Read, to hear the rest of these spooky tales.
So a few years ago, I used to work at the Waffle House in a college town, so weird people aren't really that unusual. To start off, there are only two 24-hour restaurants there, and I used to work third shift at the Waffle House. Sometimes, when a person's car would break down, the police would drop them off at one of these two places. They weren't supposed to, so they would drop them off within walking distance, but not actually outside, like some shitty loophole. So one night I was working with a cook and another waitress. We'll call them Mark and Cassie. Around 11 p.m., this old guy wanders into the lobby with a little bag. First off, we usually don't get older people after around 8 or so at the latest. Second off, this dude is creepy as fuck. He starts off with telling us about how his car broke down on the highway, and the police dropped him off in the parking lot next door. I felt bad for him because it's the middle of the night, and he's not from around here, and he has no money. So I pour him some coffee free of charge. My coworkers are usually on drugs, so I assume free coffee isn't going to get me fired. This is when the guy just starts talking my ear off. I can barely get in a word edgewise, which is difficult since I'm usually the talker. He talks about what happened to him, and then starts trying to sell the tools he has with him in his bag. Of course we say no, but he just keeps asking about it. He also starts wandering in and out of the store. The first time he does, Mark, who's ex-military, searches his bag to make sure he doesn't have any weapons, because he's starting to raise some eyebrows. There was nothing but tools, so we start to feel a bit safer. When he comes back in, I keep talking to him. Mark and Cassie note the fuck away to the other side of the store and watch. Keep in mind, this guy is literally the only person here. We don't start getting people until 1:30, when everyone leaves the bars. Now he's starting to talk about a lot of weird things. I tell him I'm interested in studying prisons, and he tells me the best way to do so is to get arrested. He then starts talking about how he used to be in prison, but he never says why. He starts to make us really nervous, so I start to draw him in case the dude decides to murder us. We'll have something because I'm good at drawing things I can see. There's a low little wall where we usually write out customer receipts, so I can draw him without him noticing. Not that that matters since he's looking straight ahead while he talks to me. We start getting customers because it's about 1 a.m. The bars let out at 1, so anyone who drives gets there shortly after, while those who walk get there about 30 minutes later. And this guy keeps talking no matter where I am. He doesn't raise his voice or anything. He just keeps talking at the same level, even when I walk away to take care of other customers. At this point, I'm starting to think this guy is schizophrenic. I'm a psych major, so I mean actual schizophrenia, and not just crazy. And at this point, wanting to get away, but I really can't because I'm afraid he might do something. He does, but not what I was afraid of. He starts just insulting customers. He tells one kid that he's fat, and starts asking him why he's so fat, and tells him he needs to lose weight. He then talks to a family of travelers and says,
"Your wife and kids are fine, but why are you so ugly?"
We decide he has to go. Mark tells him he has to leave, as we've warned him several times to leave the other customers alone. So Mark tells him to leave, or we're going to call the cops. The guy starts yelling at us, and glares at me, and asks why he should leave, but he finally just does after a while. But he comes back at half an hour later, and we have to kick him out again for harassing customers. He doesn't come back that night, so we decide he must have found a way home or contacted someone. So I finish around 7 a.m. and walk home. I live above the bars downtown, so it's a 30-minute walk, but along the way, I see the old guy. I dart behind a building and take the long way home. I don't think much of it because it's a small town and there's not a lot of places to go. I have to work again the next day, so I go home, sleep, get all my chores done, being an adult as usual. So about an hour before work, Waffle House calls me, and my coworker Kevin tells me the same old guy has been coming around several times during the day, every couple of hours looking for me. I'm a 23-year-old female, so they're worried about what he wants. I call my friend Jason and tell him why I need a ride, and he brings me in. I ask what's been going on, and apparently this guy has been in at least 10 times asking to talk to me. He never says why, so I'm on edge, waiting because I have no idea what this guy wants. Is this a 60-year-old guy pissed off because I didn't defend him when he was kicked out? Is he asking because I told him my name? Or is it something else? Surprisingly, for the first few hours of my shift, we didn't see him, but he eventually comes in and ignores me. I'm super confused, but I keep an eye on him again. I've also brought pepper spray. Before long though, we kick him out again for harassing customers. This is all very confusing for me. He's been asking for me all day and then ignores me when he comes in. But after we kick him out, he does not come back. When my shift ends, my friend asked me if I need a ride home. I tell him no. This guy has left and hasn't come back, so I'm good. Well, that's what I thought, until I saw him walking towards me after work. He yells out for me and starts coming at me, but I run inside a building that I know has another exit. I sneak out the other way before this guy can find me, and thanking every god I can think of that I know the small town better than him. I still have no idea what he wants, but I'm not taking any chances. I sneak home through some back ways. I call work and let them know what happened, and asked for the next few days off. They agree, and later tell me the old guy kept coming in for the next few days, and they finally called the police, and they took him away.
You might be able to describe 17-year-old David Faraday as the all-American boy. David was clean-cut, a good student, and a member of the Boy Scouts of America. He was also apparently something of a moral arbiter, having once confronted a marijuana dealer outside of his high school when the man had apparently been attempting to peddle the drug to members of the student body. After threatening to inform the police, the dealer was said to never have hung around the high school again. And although by today's standards we might consider this to be so-called snitch behavior, David was clearly simply trying to protect his fellow students from something he was concerned would affect their academic performance. He was a good person, with a good heart, and almost all of what he did came from a place of love. But like many boys his age, David found himself increasingly interested in the opposite gender, and there was one particular young lady that caught his attention over all others. Betty Lou Jensen was 16, a year younger than David, but she was incredibly popular, and her reputation as a charming, well-mannered young lady preceded her. She was also a very talented artist who took a great deal of interest in all things creative. It was at a local youth function that David got the chance to talk to Betty Lou, and his affection for her seemed to be entirely reciprocated. Betty Lou shared a great deal with him and even invited him to visit her after school so that he could walk her home. After a few weeks of wholesome teenage dating, something of a relationship began to blossom between the two bright-eyed young people. But all was not entirely well, as there was another boy who had his eye on Betty Lou, one who was not about to let David have her all to himself. He squared up to David when the young man was waiting outside of Betty Lou's high school, and although the confrontation didn't become physical, some pretty harsh insults were exchanged, and David was warned to stay away from his new girlfriend. Other boys might have been deterred by such a display of possessiveness and aggression, but not David. He was determined to secure his place as the only boy in Betty Lou's life, and so one afternoon on their way home from school, David asked Betty if she'd like to go on a date with him, their first date. and to his absolute elation, Betty Lou said yes. David racked his brain for a solid first date idea, and given that it was late December, decided that a great way to capture that festive romantic spirit would be to take Betty Lou to a local Christmas event. And being the gentleman that he was, he made a promise to her parents to have her back home by 11 p.m. at the very latest. Rumor has it that David and Betty were planning on attending the Christmas-themed party with a few other local high school students. But perhaps this was simply a cover to reassure the young girl's parents, because what we know for certain is that they ended up driving over to Lake Herman Road in David's Rambler station wagon, parking it up in quite a well-known spot that was known to many as Lover's Lane. The whole appeal of the spot near Lake Herman is that it was quiet and unfrequented by members of the public, hence why young couples might use it to gain some privacy for certain unsavory activities. But it wasn't just infatuated lovebirds who noted the location's seclusion, because someone else wished to take advantage of the isolation for something that was considerably more malicious. At some point during their stay up on Lover's Lane, David and Betty Lou noticed another car pull into the spot, one that parked up alongside them before turning its lights off. At first, David and Betty were worried it was the cops, come to arrest them for committing lewd acts in public. But as they peered through the darkness to study the vehicle next to them, it became increasingly obvious that it was not in fact the police. All the young couple could do was watch, growing increasingly scared as the shadowy silhouette in the front seat stayed statue still, staring at them through the passenger's window. Betty Lou told David she was spooked and asked him to see if he could get the person to leave. But unlike previous encounters where David's bravery had shone through when confronted with a source of maliciousness, he too was far too frightened to do anything. But as he prepared to start up the Rambler's engine so he could drive Betty Lou out of there, the driver of the other vehicle got out and approached David's side of the Rambler. David was transfixed, frozen in fear like a deer in a car's headlights, but when he saw the mysterious stranger pull out a pistol and aim it at his window, his flight response kicked into gear. Betty threw open the passenger side door, throwing herself from the Rambler before David followed suit, but neither kid was fast enough to outrun a bullet. The stranger fired once through the roof of the Rambler, then sprinted around the back to fire another shot at David through the vehicle's rear window. Both shots hit the young man, and he crawled along the ground near the station wagon's back wheel on the passenger side, trying and failing to escape. Betty Lou, however, began to sprint away through the darkness as the first shots were fired, but the stranger was fast. He took aim and fired 5 shots at the right side of her back, each bullet striking her torso before she fell. As she lay dying in the darkness, the killer turned his attentions back to David, pointing the pistol towards his head and pulling the trigger one last time, sending a bullet crashing into his skull just behind his left ear. Apparently, the killer then simply got back into his car and drove away into the night. Sometime later, someone who drove past the spot on Lover's Lane must have seen the bodies lying in the dirt, and then rushed to call the police. David was still breathing when they arrived on the scene, but was completely unresponsive, and was dead on arrival when he was finally taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. The double homicide stunned and horrified the local community, and rumors abounded that there was a crazed, firearm-wielding madman on the loose, with it only being a matter of time before they struck again. One of the first people contacted by the police as a potential suspect in the murders was the young man who had confronted David as a result of his own jealousies over his and Betty Lou's blossoming relationship. But it was discovered that this young man had a strong alibi for his whereabouts, meaning there was no way he could have been the mysterious bloodthirsty stranger who pulled into Lover's Lane that night. As the summer of 1969 drew to a close, journalists and law enforcement alike wondered if the teenage lover's killer would ever be found, but little did they know that the nightmare had just began, and what would follow would continue to baffle all those involved for decades to come. Because the man who took David and Betty Lou's lives that evening, the man who relentlessly fired bullet after bullet into the Rambler station wagon, would come to be known by a name that would echo through the annals of true crime all over the world: the Zodiac. Zodiac's identity remains a complete mystery even to this day. The killer's nickname originated from a series of taunting letters and cards sent to the San Francisco Bay Area press. These letters included 4 cryptograms based around a number of ciphers, one of which was recently solved by the FBI after over 50 years of research and study. We know for certain that the Zodiac murdered 5 people in Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco in the 11 months spanning December of 1968 and October of 1969. It seems he preferred to target young couples, which is how he seemed to have come across David and Betty Lou while the pair were on their first date. Yet despite only 5 confirmed victims being attributed to the Zodiac, he once claimed to have murdered 32 other people, bringing his total body count to 37 victims. A killing spree that started with 2 young lovers, so excited to finally have some time alone together on their first date, never being able to imagine that it would end in such a brutal moment of painful finality. So the next time you're on a first date, don't be so quick to go somewhere secluded, as you never know who might be watching or following, just ready to turn a perfect
This took place in 2012 at a 7-Eleven gas station when I was a junior in college. I attended a community college in New York. Not the city, just the state itself. The reason I chose this school was to make it easier for me to transfer to the university I originally wanted. However, every college student knows that college isn't free and can definitely leave you with a large debt in your bank account. I received federal aid from state, but there was still a lot of tuition that I had to pay for. Because of this, I ended up getting a full-time job at a 7-Eleven working as a gas station attendant. It wasn't the best paying job, but it paid enough to help me get by while also paying off school. I've done tons of under-the-table stuff like a bouncer, a cleaner at bars, but I was really surprised that I was working this hard. For reference, I'm a male, and I was 20 at the time of the story. I had mostly worked night shifts, which I didn't mind doing as these were the shifts where you'd commonly have to deal with less people. 10 p.m. was around the time where you'd stop getting customers and traffic would start to die down. Anything past 10 p.m. was your occasional customers coming in for a late night snack or something. I'd say my shifts went relatively well until a night where I had to cover for someone who called in sick. It was annoying to say the least, but I realized it's a bigger paycheck at the end of the day. When working the night shift, we had to go ahead and shut the front door, turn off all of the lights, and operate from the window box. It was a quiet night with little to no cars on the road, and I had just gotten done wiping the counter. With nothing to do, I go behind the counter and decide to play some Sudoku to pass the time when I look out the window and saw a man by the gas pumps. He looked somewhat normal, although a bit lanky, and seemed to have taken an interest in the gas pumps for some reason. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, cargo pants, and, out of all things, was carrying an empty Macy's bag. He casually walked around the pumps as if he were inspecting them. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I kept a close eye on him. It also came to my attention that this man didn't have a car, nor did he arrive in one. It was almost as if he just walked up to the gas station. After all, this was located in an area that was notorious to druggies and meth heads, so I guess it wasn't all that uncommon. About a minute later, he proceeds to walk up to the window and says he needs pump 3. He throws his card into the box thing and I pull it in. Our practice for this was that if they gave us their card, we'd let them pump as much gas as they wanted and swipe their card afterwards. We try to go above and beyond for our customers, but the policy sort of changed for obvious reasons. I then see him walk toward pump 3, confused as to what he was doing since I didn't see a car. What I saw him do next is something that chilled me to the bone, where all I could do is just watch. He proceeds to take the gas pump and begins to pour all of the gasoline on the actual pump itself while making this insane laugh. At this point, I hit this little pager we have under the desk that alerts the police in case of a fire or robbery. 20-year-old me sees this man take out a lighter and attempts to ignite it. By some stupid luck, the lighter isn't working, and I'm crouched down by the counter praying the police make it in time before this place goes up in flames. These pumps are extremely flammable, and I knew that if he had managed to light it, that it would have been over. The more he tried to light the lighter, the more irritated he became, and that was when I hear the sound of police sirens approaching. They get out of their patrol cars and tase him on the spot before he could start up the lighter. I come running out of the gas station, nearly crying, knowing that if they had arrived any later, I'd probably be dead. Both police and the fire department arrived on scene, where they were thankfully able to remove the gas. At that point, I fall to my knees, bawling my eyes out as my body hit the concrete of the gas station. I was comforted by police and was taken to a hospital to check if I was exposed to any hazardous chemicals. I obviously ended work early that night, but still got paid for what I was owed. A week later, I got laid off from 7-Eleven, but ended up getting a huge severance package to pay for school. I ended up getting a new job shortly after that, after my previous employer wrote a glowing recommendation letter for me. While something good did happen, this also had a major impact on my mental health, as I had to get years of therapy. It's been 10 years now, and this incident is still brought up by my parents from time to time. I'm now in my early 30s and have a lovely wife and have moved past it. I urge anyone reading this to cherish the time you have, as you don't know what will be your last day. Had that man managed to spark that lighter, I wouldn't be writing this right now. The whole gas station would have exploded, and that's exactly what I thought was gonna happen. I still don't know what his intentions were or why he did what he did, but to be honest, I don't want to know. I'd like to think that he was on something, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think of the alternative. I still think about how it would have turned out had the police arrived even a minute later.
In high school, when I was a junior, I took a psychology class. It was my second period of the day. I liked the class, and one of the best things about it was that we were able to take open book tests. The teacher was really chill and let us work together on stuff, including the tests. We also had an option to take the tests in study rooms, which I always did, because it was much more quiet and I just felt more comfortable in there. I was the only person in the class who did this though, because you needed a pass and the study rooms were all the way in the basement of the school. I guess most students just found that a hassle and would rather work with each other as well. Anyways, one particular Friday, when we had a test to take, I did the usual thing, which was to get the test from the teacher and then go down to the study room. It took me about 5 minutes to get down there. There wasn't a whole lot at all on that level of the school. Pretty much just the study rooms and then a couple of storage rooms and some old classrooms that weren't used. I got into one of the rooms and turned on the light. The rooms had carpet floors with a table and a few chairs in each one. They also had a little window for looking out into the hallway. I began the test and searched through my psychology book for the answers. I remember I had just reached question 15 when I suddenly heard over the intercom that we were entering a lockdown. I got a little nervous, but I told myself it was probably nothing. I turned the lights off like we were instructed to, but I didn't see a lock on the door. Our school was kind of old and these study rooms were sort of outdated. I went under the desk and decided to play some games on my phone to pass the time. Several minutes went by without anything happening. Then I heard some footsteps coming down the hallway. I got really nervous knowing the footsteps likely belonged to someone that wasn't supposed to be in the school. I turned my phone off and I got really quiet. The footsteps went down towards the door of my study room. As I hid under the table, I slowly turned my head to look towards the window, and just as I did, I saw a man walk past it. All I could tell is that he was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, really. He walked past without looking in the window, but it still scared me a lot. Then I heard the door open in the room across the hall from mine, and then it shut. He must have gone in it, and at that point, I was seriously considering making a run for it. I was relatively fast, but I didn't know who this guy was. I was trying to psych myself up into running when I heard the door open once again and then shut. I buried my face into the ground and held my breath. I didn't really hear any footsteps though, so I lifted my head slightly to listen. I didn't know whether he had walked away or if he was just standing there. This made it much more risky for me to try to run away, so I decided to stay put for the time. Several minutes went by and I got more and more nervous. I decided once again I was going to try to run back upstairs, and this time I was going to actually do it. I didn't bother getting my backpack or anything, besides just my phone, wallet, and keys. I slowly crawled up the carpet to the door, and then stood up, careful not to make a sound. I then placed my hands on the doorknob. The second it started to turn, I heard it creak, and it sounded extremely loud. At that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I quickly left the room, and then headed down the hallways. Once I saw it was clear, I started sprinting towards the stairs, which were about 50 feet away. As I was running, I looked down one hallway to my right while passing by, and saw the man walking out of a room about 20 feet down the hallway. I ran even faster the rest of the ways and didn't look back. I sprinted up the stairs all the way back to my classroom. Once I got there, I pounded on the door yelling that it was me, and after about 10 seconds, I was let in. I told the teacher what had happened, and she alerted the principal. Police were able to get into the basement and locate the man, who was later found hiding in the same study room I had been in. Apparently, the man had broken into the school and beat up one of the teachers, then ran off. They had been searching the school, but hadn't made it to the basement yet. Every time I went near the basement of the school for the rest of my high school career, I would think about that day.
This happened when I was in college. It was a warm Sunday evening in June, and my friend Joanne and I decided to go for a walk. We had seen a play on campus the night before, Saturday, and a friend of ours named Lee was supposed to be attending the performance that night on Sunday. Since we had already seen the production, we knew what time it was ending and we hoped to surprise Lee. But we waited and waited and he never came out. It turned out that something had came up and he had not gone to the show after all. Disappointed, we started back home. We walked up this hill from the theater, and as we turned around the corner, we noticed a college-aged white guy in a white t-shirt and blue jeans leaning against a tree. It definitely looked suspicious because this was 10:30 at night. As we passed by that guy in the tree, the guy started following us. We sort of tensed up, not really sure what to do. Since it was summer, the college was hosting a cheerleading camp for high school girls. A large group of cheerleaders was coming back from some event and they were not very far ahead of us. I suggested to Joanne that we follow those girls to the dorm they were staying in, wait there for a few minutes until this guy left, and then we could head on back to our dorm. We stayed at the cheerleaders' dorm until we were sure the guy must be gone. Then we headed out. When we started up the hill going toward our dorm, we looked back and we realized to our horror, the guy had waited for us and he was now following us yet again. We started to panic, not knowing what to do. There was a part of our walk where we had to pass by dorms which were unoccupied since it was summer. If he was still following us at that point, there would be no one who could hear us or see us, and who knows what he would have done to us then. We had no choice though. We had to go by that deserted area in order to get back to our dorm. It was at that point that I remembered a TV show that I'd seen on Friday just 2 days before, where a police officer shared what to do if you're ever being followed. He said that what the perpetrator is counting on is the element of surprise. So if you're being followed, you should then turn around so you're directly facing them, plant your feet firmly, and just stare hard at them. It lets the person know that you're very aware of them and that you're standing your ground. And that's exactly what I did. I spun around, crossed my arms with my feet firmly planted, and stared hard at the guy. Amazingly, it actually worked. The guy stopped, not knowing what to do, then gradually backed off, finally turning around and then leaving. I stayed where I was until he was finally out of sight. Then Joanne and I ran as fast as we could until we were finally safely back in our dorm. We didn't go for any late night walks after that. I thank God that I had seen that program 2 days before. It really saved us from God knows what.
I spend my days as a humble worker at 7-Eleven. More specifically, I was a store manager and franchise owner. I was no software engineer or doctor, and while my family did have their opinions on what I did for a living, my job paid rather well. I was a very different man in my past, but deciding to go the route of franchising a store was a more hands-on career path that mostly kept me in check. It was a low-stress but high-labor job, and that was honestly perfect for me. The job was almost therapeutic to me. It gave me something to take care of, something to look forward to every day. Of course, I couldn't do this alone. Working with me in my daytime shifts were workers Molly and Adam. Molly and Adam were young. They were working there to pay off their college tuition. We all considered ourselves like a family to each other. Molly, Adam, and I grew super close to each other in our time working there. They were like the kids I never had, and this naturally made me a little protective over them. We would always encounter weird or upset customers, and it was usually me who had to stand up for them. I didn't want anything to happen to them. They were so young. Nothing bad had happened to Molly or Adam yet, and I was grateful for that. But one early morning, that changed. It was a Tuesday morning. I want to say the incident occurred around 9 a.m. The sun was out and things seemed to be going normal. This time of day was always peaceful. There was usually never any problems. Eventually, a blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Inside of the car was a rather average-looking middle-aged man. He stepped out of the car and started filling it with gas. While the pump was going, he then proceeded to the front of the store. As per their training, Molly and Adam greeted him. The man just nodded and started walking around the aisles. He then looped back around the store, approached Molly, and started flirting with her. Molly was visibly uncomfortable, and while I wanted to go to the back of the store and do my inventory logging, I couldn't do this, not with a man hitting on Molly like that. Adam, however, told me that he could handle the man if he started acting any weirder, and naturally, I trusted him. I reluctantly stepped in the back room and started counting down and logging all the items that were there. While I was doing this, however, I kept looking back towards the man to see what he was doing. It seemed like the man was looking back at me as well. This was odd for a number of reasons. Customers aren't supposed to be this close to the back of the store, and he kept awkwardly peering in through the utility room. To make things worse, every time I looked back, the man started to try and act busy. It was like he was trying to pass time or look natural for some reason. I stepped out of the room and asked the man if I could help him. He seemed to awkwardly and rudely shun me off and keep pacing around the store pretending like he was looking for something. For some reason, I decided to ignore all these red flags and continue my work in the back. Eventually, while Molly was passing by the back room, she whispered to me that the man was making her very uncomfortable. I told her that once I finished with the shelf I was working on, I would quickly go outside and help her. I essentially told her to hang in there and wait behind Adam. It was super confusing what the man even wanted. He seemed to have stopped flirting with Molly completely and was instead focused on trying to peer through the back door for some reason. As annoying as this was, I just wanted to get through my work. I had one last crate of granola bars to log down and I didn't want this weird man to stop that. But that's when I heard a commotion coming from the main room. "Excuse me, sir, you're not allowed to be back there. What are you trying to pull off?" "Call the police, Adam," I heard Molly exclaim right after that. I quickly ran out of the storage room to see what was happening and saw the commotion. The man in the blue car was trying to pull something off. I saw Molly in shock and fear in the corner, and Adam with his fists up standing right in front of her. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I asked the man. Whoa, what kind of place is this? What's even back there? What are you guys hiding?" "Get out of here, the sign clearly says employees only." "You expect me to just sit here and let you get away with this? No way in hell." We were all in complete shock. Adam tried to calm the man down, however. "Sir, we don't need to get violent, okay? You can just calm down and we don't have to— I don't want to hear another word from you psychos." The man snapped back at Adam. Molly started to cry. She was ready to dart out the store. The man then started reaching for his pocket. We had no idea what he was going to pull out. I tackled the man in the back of the shop and screamed at Adam and Molly to just head away and call the police. A few more minutes of us rustling in the utility room occurred. I managed to headlock the man, but he just kept hitting me off. After a few more minutes of us rustling and fighting in the back, The cops eventually got there, but sadly, they couldn't find him on the scene. We got the man's face on security camera, and his car was still at the pumps. We had both his face and his license plate on camera. Despite all this, the police just left. They couldn't find any sign of him, and they assumed that he just ran out through one of the other back doors. As the cops left, I made sure to dump the man's body right next to the first. As I mentioned before, I was a different man in my past. This job really changed me. It seemed like the man in the blue car clearly noticed the other body I had. Normally it's pretty well hidden. Not even Molly or Adam could find it. But I guess one of the legs must have been sticking out or something like that while I was moving stuff around. I re-looked at the security footage to make sure there was no evidence left behind. It seemed like the man wasn't reaching for a gun or a knife. He was reaching for his phone to call the police. I really didn't want it to be this way, but he knew my secret. The man was now part of my collection. Molly and Adam still have no idea what happened, and you bet I'm planning to keep it that way. They can't find out anything about my past. If they did, they'd be shattered. For now, my secret remains safe from the public eye, and I will ensure no one remembers that day.
A couple of years ago, me and my boyfriend were looking at this budget Airbnb for a weekend in Berlin. It wasn't the nicest place we'd seen, but to us it was just going to be a place to get some sleep in between hours of exploring Berlin. We'd hardly be there basically, so we figured we'd go for it. When it comes to paying for the rental stuff, there's a problem with my boyfriend's card details, so we decide to use mine. Then there's a problem with my card details too, so we try using PayPal. That doesn't work either, and we can't work out what's going on because we definitely had the money in our accounts. It must have been a problem with Airbnb's payment services or something. But tell that to the owners, who ended up getting really annoyed with us because we'd already basically agreed to rent the place via verbal agreement. By the time we got our bank stuff sorted, turned out it was fraud on both our accounts. They weren't interested in renting to us anymore, so we missed out. Or so we thought. Ages and ages later, my boyfriend sends me a link to an article from a German newspaper telling me to get it up on my iPad so I could use Chrome to translate it. But before I actually used the translate feature, I scrolled through the whole article like, why did he send this to me for? And lo and behold, there's a picture of the Airbnb we wanted to rent. Only then did I translate the text, so it was only after that I read that 2 parents and their young baby had died in a carbon monoxide leak that occurred overnight in the bloody Airbnb we were going to stay in. I'm not religious or anything, never have been, but I kinda get what people are talking about now when they mention guardian angels or whatever. If it hadn't have been for that annoying fraud, we'd have rented the flat, and it might have been us that were there when the gas leak happened. I was just absolutely horrified when I read through the story, and I was crying like a baby by the end of it. It said the owner had been arrested over it, that he was going to be charged with some variant of manslaughter or whatever, and rightfully so if you ask me. I still get chills when I think about it though, and obviously we just stick to hotels these days. Not that they're any safer, but it just makes me feel safer, you know? Because when I picture that poor family who went to bed one night and never woke up again, all because some cowboy landlord was too cheap to service the flat. It doesn't bear thinking about.
When I was a senior in high school, during my last spring semester, I had taken all of the classes that I needed to take, and I had an extra hour during the day that I could use to just study. I had an entire classroom to myself for studying, but I would usually just play games on my phone. It was during my 3rd period, so I couldn't go home early or anything like that, but it was still a nice break for me. One day, I got to my study hour and actually had some homework to do. I began working and went for about 20 minutes until I heard an announcement come over the school intercom. It was an announcement of a lockdown, and everyone was instructed to lock their doors and return to their classrooms if they were not in them. I wasn't quite sure if this was a drill or not at first, so I went over and shut the door. The classroom that I was in a wing of the school that was farthest from the locker commons and cafeteria, so I figured no teachers would come over there or hear anything. So I just went back to my homework. I will admit though, I was slightly scared, but really I thought nothing of it, because in my time at that high school, we had had 2 previous lockdowns, which were basically just false alarms. I was working on my homework when suddenly I heard a knocking at the door. I walked over to the door and saw a kid outside. I opened the door and he told me he had seen a guy in the hallway. The kid seemed to be in a panic, so I let him in the room and we locked the door. The kid explained to me that he went out for a drink of water and saw an older-looking creepy guy walking towards him. The kid wasn't able to get back to his original classroom because he would have to go past the creepy guy. I turned off the lights in the classroom and we both went to the back corner. We sat there in pitch-black silence for several minutes. I whispered over to the kid and asked him what his name was, but he appeared to be gone. Then there was another knocking at the door to the classroom. I was pretty scared at this point, but I slowly got up and walked over to the door. I listened on the other side and heard someone say police. I was shocked. I opened up the door to see several officers. One of them pulled me out of the room immediately. I was as confused as can be, but then I saw them go into the room and a short time later come out with the kid that I had let in. They led him away and they told me that he had been the reason for the lockdown. As it turns out, he was a former student who had graduated 2 years earlier. He had gone to the school and had made several threats against the school, but was seen by a staff member shortly after entering. It really creeped me out knowing I had been alone in a classroom with him.
One scary day, my mom and I went to Subway for a quick snack. When we reached our destination, we got out of the car and went inside. Inside, I sat at a table near the only window there. I'd always liked the window seats. My mom was ordering, and I was just watching like the little stalker I was. But as I watched my mother deal with the cashier, the situation seemed to get weird. I could hear them talking from where I was, when I suddenly heard the words sex and children. I was starting to get nervous, so I went up to the counter and rested my arm on my mom's head. I'm a lot taller than my mom. The cashier looks at me with an angered look and says, "Who the F are you?" I hadn't even said or done anything, and he's treating me like that. I'd gone to anger classes before, and I did pretty well. But even still, it took everything I had just to say, "I'm her son." Why? I wanted to say so much more to someone that rude. The cashier was wide-eyed. "He's your son?" My mother said yes. Then the cashier pretended that nothing happened, even though I wanted to snap his freaking neck. My mom saw my anger and said to calm down. I just didn't know why this guy was being so disrespectful. The cashier is staring at something under the table, and I look suspiciously at him and look over the table. The cashier noticed me looking at him, so he lifted his head up fast, like he was looking at something in secret. I was still trying very much to fight the anger from this rude person. I don't know what he and my mom had been talking about, but he still had no reason to treat us like he did. Suddenly, and I still have no idea what set this guy off, maybe he was crazy, he pulls out a pistol that he had apparently taped under the counter, and he began to point it at the two of us. And when he did, I let anger take over me, and I jumped over the counter and began fighting with this guy. I felt like if I didn't, someone was going to get hurt, and I wasn't going to give up until that gun was out of his hand. Taking quick glances to check on my mother, she seemed extremely surprised, and she was still like a statue. As I'm struggling with the cashier, he whips the arm holding the gun toward my head, and I flinch and feel something smash into me. It hurts, but I don't stop fighting with this man. My mom at this point was running out of the store, and before I knew it, I feel another crushing thud against the back of my head, and then everything slowly got dark. I came to in a hospital bed. Confused, I got up, but at that moment, the only thing I felt was pain. I dropped myself back onto the bed. A doctor walked in and said that I had a concussion. He told me not to worry, that I'd be fine within about a month. All I have to say is that I'm glad I didn't get shot. We are, along with several others, pressing charges against this freak. Apparently, the guy just snapped, and no one knew he had been hiding a weapon in the store.
This happened during autumn of 2013. I was working as a delivery boy for a pizza place. I lived in southern Ontario, in a fairly modestly sized city. I was doing what was possibly the longest drive that I'd ever taken for a delivery. It was in the middle of a forested area, about 25 minutes away from the place I worked at. The place that I worked for is on the outskirts of the city, so it wasn't really unusual for us to get rural deliveries. When I finally pulled up to the address in question, it was an old, disheveled, dilapidated house, totally surrounded by forest. I called on my boss and I asked him twice just to make sure this is the correct address. I could tell he was in a crappy mood, so I didn't want to bother him any further. I just took a deep breath and then walked to the front door of the house. There was no doorbell, so I decided to knock loudly just to make sure that the residents heard me. No response. I waited for about a minute before knocking again, saying that I was the pizza guy. Still no response. As I began to turn around to get back to my car, I saw a pair of eyes from an open window, staring intently and directly at me. After about 5 seconds of that person staring at me so eerily, I just dropped the pizza and ran back to my car. The damn thing wouldn't turn on until I turned my keys for the third time. I didn't get too far away from the house when the car then began jolting. Then an awful screeching sound started, forcing me to stop the car. When I got out and looked at my tires, my blood froze. Just what I had feared. All 4 of the tires were slashed. I thought to myself, who the fuck did this? I mean, I saw that person in the window while I was at the front door. I then went back to my car and called the emergency services. I explained my situation to them to the best of my ability. The operator then told me that the police would be there in about half an hour. I then asked her if it would be best to stay in the car or run away. She said that it would probably be best to stay in my car. I waited anxiously for the police to arrive while I was still on the line with the operator. What happened next utterly broke me, and I truly hope that nobody else ever has to experience this level of fear. While I was examining my surroundings, I looked in the overhead mirror and I saw that same person before that was in the open window, right in the middle of the road behind my car. I could tell now that it was a man, eyes open even wider than before. Then I could ever so slightly see a demented smile then spread across his face. I just swung open the door and fled into the woods, not giving a second crap about me and my life. I ran until I was nearly out of breath, then hid behind a log and some shrubs. I waited for what felt like an hour until I finally heard a siren wailing in the distance. I gathered all the stamina I had left and ran back to my car. By the time I got back, police were inspecting my car. I ran to them shouting for help like a lunatic. I fell to the ground and then coughed from running so much. 2 officers then picked me up and questioned me. I told them the situation, and they sent most of the officers in the house, but one stayed with me for company. Eventually the officers came out with a knife, obviously the one used to slash my tires. One officer said that it was probably some sick, insane couple who did this, given that I saw the man. Unfortunately, they were never found, and that still really pains me to this day. I obviously quit my job right after that, and I began working in a department store in the city. But I'll never forget the look on that man's face when he stared at my car in the pitch black darkness. I live in a small studio apartment. I like my place a lot, even though it has some details that always made me really nervous living here. The wall facing the street is basically just a giant window, and I also live on the 2nd floor, so my window is very close to the streets below. The marquee looks very easily climbable and gives direct access to my window. Even though that makes me a little uncomfortable, nothing really ever happened, and it just stopped bothering me a couple of months after I moved in. That is, until last week. Last Monday, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to go get some water to drink. Since the kitchen is right next to the side of my front door, I could hear something coming from the corridor as I filled up a cup. It wasn't coming from another apartment or from the streets. The noise had that very specific reverberation from an empty corridor. I approached the door and could make out that the sound was actually some kind of trap beat playing on repeat. At first, I thought maybe that was just some drunk guy messing around with his phone before getting to his apartment, but after laying in bed again, I could still faintly hear the same beat coming from the corridor. It kept playing and playing until I fell asleep about an hour later. 7 a.m. rolls around and I'm woken up by someone ringing the doorbell. It was a cop. A bunch of them, actually. The landlord and some of my neighbors were also there. Even with the place really crowded, it was really hard to miss the trail of blood that went from the corridor window to the far end of the wall. The cops said that someone was leaving for work early in the morning when they came across the blood smears and then immediately called the police. He questioned me and the neighbors. The place was scrubbed and we went on with our lives, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every single day I always come home and walk over where the blood was, and I always wonder what the heck happened in the corridor that night. Now, I was a little bit uncomfortable living here before, but now I'm definitely really spooked out. I wonder if I'll ever figure out what happened. When I was in college, I lived in apartments that weren't on campus but still called student housing. I saw this guy around that I thought was pretty cute. His name was Kiefer. He knocked on my door one day and he said he was the maintenance man and that he needed to change our AC filters. I was making dinner for my roommate at the time and for myself, and he commented that it smelled really good, so I invited him in to stay for dinner. All went pretty normal as we watched a movie afterwards. Totally innocent. At about midnight or so, I kept telling him that I was really tired, trying to hint for him to leave. My roommate had already gone to bed, so it was just him and me now. After telling him to leave because I was going to bed, he kept trying to talk me out of it, saying that I should stay up longer. He just kept taking forever, trying to drag it out. When he was putting on his shoes, he then started crying that he had a cramp in both of his calves. He told me that he couldn't walk upstairs and that he didn't know what to do. I really wanted to go knock on his door to have his roommate come and get him, but I'm in a wheelchair and I couldn't go upstairs. We had an extra bedroom in our apartment that only had a bed in it and nothing else. He continued asking if he could sleep in the room and I kept telling him no. We argued for like 10 minutes about allowing him to sleep in the extra bedroom. I was so freaking exhausted, I just went ahead and decided to let him. I locked my roommate's door and my door so that he at least couldn't come into our rooms. When I woke up the next morning, luckily he was gone and nothing was stolen. I honestly should have reported it to the apartment complex, but I wasn't really thinking. A couple of days later, I heard someone knock on my bedroom window in the middle of the night, and I totally flipped out about it. It ended up being Kiefer, but obviously I didn't let him in. Then the next night, my roommate and I were in the living room, and then he came and knocked on our door. Ashley, my roommate, answered it, and he asked for me, and she said that I was asleep already. His response?
No, I know she's not asleep. I look inside y'all's window, so I know she's awake.
Yeah, Kiefer was definitely a creep.
Submitted by Orion. I'm here to share with you a really strange story. This is not my own experience, it's my friend's story. And let's call him James. James has been working at a Subway for a year, and he really hates his job, but it pays pretty good. Well, on February 11th of 2016, he almost quit. Because he was just having a regular day until this one customer comes in. It's a big guy, very rough looking. He welcomes the guy, saying that he'd be with him in a moment because he had to finish up another order. Eventually, they get to his order, and James rings him up at the register. Once everything is done, he hands the guy his sandwich bag. But the guy doesn't move. He doesn't try to take the sandwich. He tries to get the man's attention. Maybe he just zoned out for a second. But the guy completely stops. He doesn't blink. He's just staring straight ahead into nothingness. James was wondering what happened, because it looked like the guy glitched. as if he was an android that stopped working. James even clapped his hands in front of the man to see if he would blink, but he didn't. He didn't react to anything. Freaking out, James runs to his manager to see what needed to be done. Maybe this guy had a health condition. Maybe they needed to call an ambulance. For all James knew, he was having a strange seizure or something. But as he and the manager approach the front of the store, the man isn't there, and the sandwich bag is still on the counter. The manager is annoyed, thinking that James made this up to freak him out. But James is serious, so he talks the manager into showing him the tapes to prove his point about how weird this guy was. They go together since the store was closed to check the security footage. And get this, the guy never shows up on the tapes. James was dumbfounded when he saw it, because there was James making the sandwich for no one. Now, my friend may be a stoner every other weekend when he can, but he's definitely never been known to hallucinate. He still doesn't know what happened that day.
Back in my mid to late 20s, I worked a job as a security guard at a Kmart Supercenter in Iowa City, Iowa. Most of you probably never heard of Kmart before, but to put it in simple terms, just imagine a cheaper Walmart/Target. Business was booming back in the early 2000s, and nowadays a lot of Kmarts ended up closing down. My job was to keep watch of one that was currently in the process of relocating. It was a chill job, although a bit boring, as you'd be the only one in the store with nothing to do. This never really bothered me, as I'd always find myself playing games on my phone or texting a friend to pass time. Well, one day I had been scheduled to work a double, meaning I'd be working both the day and night shift. The reason for this was because the other security guard who did the night shifts quit on the spot and went to go make a living in real estate. Because apparently this guy's obviously never heard of a 2 weeks notice before, and they scheduled me until they could find another person. This got on my nerves pretty easily, and sitting in the dark making $14 an hour didn't help. That being said, I really didn't have a choice and bit my lip and agreed to work a double. Throughout the day, things went well for the most part, watching the movers relocate the shelves, equipment, etc. 7 p.m. comes around and I prepare myself for a long 10-hour night shift. Being all alone in an empty store with no light but a little office in the back is scary enough. Now let's fast forward till around 1 a.m. I'm sitting on my chair by the front when I hear one of the radios turn on in the back office. It's not uncommon for them to go off once in a while, as they tend to pick up signal from someone else on the same channel. Not thinking anything of it, I tend to my phone when I hear it go off again, this time with a much stronger signal. At that point, I get up and walk toward the back office when I hear this low, grainy voice say, "I can see you." My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I heard him say this, and it was then where I asked who it was. After getting no response, I glance over to the back exit of the store, and due to the glow of the red exit sign, I was able to make out the silhouette of a person. However, for some reason, I don't think they saw me, and I played dumb by looking the other way and turning off all of the radios. I wasn't just gonna go back to my post with someone possibly dangerous in the building with me, so I did the only thing I could do. Right then, I turn around and start booking it toward the front entrance as I heard whoever it was trying to catch up. Thankfully, I made it out the door, locking it behind me. A few seconds later, I see this tall man dressed in all black run up to the front and put his hands on the window. He was not a pleasant-looking man. His eyes were wild and his grin was menacing. At that point, I called the police, where they thankfully arrived in a few minutes, where they went inside the building. However, like in most situations like this, whoever was inside the store with me was gone. Police concluded that they had simply left through the emergency exit. Needless to say, I continued my shift while a patrol car stayed in front just in case whoever it was came back. Till this day, I still can't get that man's face out of my head. It's just something you can't unsee. I stayed at that job for a month later before landing a new one that paid more and didn't require night shifts. I've never seen or heard from that man again, and I really hope it stays that way. While all of this was indeed a scary situation, one question still comes up that I can't seem to figure out the answer to. The store had several cameras that had night vision, and not one of them picked up the man by the exit, even though they were pointed at it. The police and I reviewed the footage and saw no one in the store, other than me. That was the reason as to what made me so scared, and it's also the reason why I will never work another night shift again.
So for context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I also drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out driving for Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing really special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It happened to be a pickup from this kinda lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive, find my passenger, and he has all of his belongings with him, like several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not really too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and we're on our way. Now, during the ride, the guy was crying and saying that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had apparently walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because her name was on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we happen to have a street that is pretty well known for having vices. Hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. You know, the works. We get to the motel and he asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as having people trying to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, stories for another time. This motel was on that street that I had mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed right out against the building. And I'm a pretty big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just south of my car, then followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to. One of the ladies then pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I then saw the guy raise a fucking shotgun right out of his long coat and then storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, then slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was honestly just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice that he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least go to where I could get my gun. I know that the guy and the ladies both saw me, and I know that they knew I saw the gun. I just had to get the fuck out of there. You know how it goes. No witnesses. I got in my car and then sped away as quickly as possible. I got a block or so away and then called the cops. I gave them every detail I could. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a lift. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunmen or the women. They never answered the door that I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I definitely wasn't. I know what I saw.
5 years ago, when I was in high school, we were having a very normal day. I was in my 5th hour class, which was my last class of the day, so I was excited to go home. It was gym class, and we happened to be outside playing Foursquare in one of the parking lots behind the school. It wasn't that long into the game when suddenly our teacher, Mr. Watson, told us all to stop our games and listen up. He announced that the school was in a lockdown, and we all needed to go inside and he would get us to a classroom. I wasn't too excited about this, and I was afraid we would be locked down until after school was supposed to get out. Mr. Watson began waving us all inside, and as he was distracted, I saw an opportunity to run away and get to my car. I know it was a dumb thing to do, but I was scared of the lockdown, and I was already outside, so I decided to make a run for it. Mr. Watson didn't even notice me leaving, and I began making my way to my car. At our high school, it costed a lot of money to park in the school parking lot, so they had a free one that was farther away that I parked at. The only problem was to get there was maybe about a 10-minute walk, and it went through the woods a little bit. I jogged down the path and through the woods. I had to stop and start walking to catch my breath from the run. I stopped to text my best friend Casey that I had left the school and asked what the lockdown was for. As I was standing there on the path though, I started to hear some noises coming towards me. It sounded like another person running. I figured it was another student running away like I had to go to their car. I looked into the direction of the noise, and I could see through the trees where the path curved that it was a grown man running. Immediately I got a bad feeling, and I jumped behind a tree in the woods. The man slowed down and came around the corner. I held my breath and hoped that he wouldn't see me. He had dark hair and a goatee, and walked a ways past me. He kept looking over his shoulder, and then it sounded like he went into the woods because I heard trees and brush being moved around. Then the noises stopped. I waited there and was hoping to hear him walk away, but I heard nothing. It sounded like he had gone just inside the woods, about 30 or 40 feet down the path from where I went in. The trees were pretty thick in this area, and it was a good place to hide, but I didn't dare move or make a sound. I really just wanted to go to my car and drive away. I realized the mistake that I had made by running from class now, but it was too late to do anything about it. I sat there for a few minutes, and I knew the man was still there, but I was sure that he hadn't seen me. I debated in my mind between running back to school or trying to make a run for my car, but they both seemed pretty risky, and I didn't want to take a chance. So I remained hiding there, trying my best to stay silent, because any movement I made would make noises with all the trees and branches in there. I occasionally heard noises from where the man had gone in, pretty much confirming to me that he was still there. After what had to be at least 5 to 10 minutes of hiding, I started to hear police sirens off in the distance. They got closer and closer and seemed to be heading for the school. The sound of those sirens made me feel a little bit safer and more brave, so I then decided I was going to run back towards the school. I took a deep breath, and on the count of 3, I made a run for it back to the path towards the school. I heard the man start to move in the woods when I started running, but I couldn't tell if he was chasing after me or moving in another direction. I didn't look back at all and ran my fastest until I had made it up to the school. I saw the police officers arriving, and I ran up to one of them and told them about the man in the woods. They had me wait with some other officers for a while. The man had made a run for it, but he ended up being caught a short time later deeper into the woods. Apparently he had been trying to get into the school and had actually broken a window. My mom came and picked me up, and I had to get my car later when the area was cleared for us to return.
So I just moved to California about 4 months ago, and everything's been pretty much a dry run for the worst. My car got rear-ended, my living situation absolutely sucks, and I'm now more broke than I've ever been in my life. I've also had some pretty creepy experiences out here that have definitely forced me to be more on my guard. I come from a small town where you can walk the streets at 2 in the morning and arrive home in one piece. But I now live in a really large part of LA where you have to keep your eyes peeled 24/7. It also doesn't really help that I watch a lot of crime shows and have now become terrified to leave my apartment after these following events. The first happened to my rental car that I was given due to my car accident. I was a full-time DoorDash driver trying to make ends meet in an attempt to squirrel away some cash, as I knew I'd be relying on Lyft rides and would need basic things such as groceries when my time with the rental eventually ran out. My DoorDash shifts typically ran from early in the morning to late in the evening, as LA gas prices and the fancy grocery rates aren't going to pay for themselves. All of that along with my rent to my crazy roommate. Anyway, fast forward, and I dragged myself and my silver Sentra to a grocery store that wasn't too far away from my complex. The incident was short, simple, and very common. I was pulling into a space at the same time as another car. It was a larger tan SUV. At first, I didn't really get a good look at the people inside the vehicle, and without thinking of any circumstance, I pulled in. Now in hindsight, I probably should have submitted and just given the spot to them. However, it was a really long shift, I was tired, and the spot was really close to the groceries doors. It was dark outside after all, and I figured the shorter walk would be safer. Now, to this day, I can't tell you what possessed me to stay put. Normally I would have gotten out and just put my headphones in without thinking, but this time, something stopped me. I looked back and I noticed the car had parked diagonally behind me. I could easily look back from the driver's side window and see them, and they pulled in so their faces were towards me. There were 2 very oversized men in baseball caps, just looking at me. There was something in the stare that kept me locked solid in the vehicle. I locked all of my doors and kept looking back every so often. They kept their eyes glued on my every move. I felt a terrible feeling wash over me as I then put the car in reverse and exited the lot. Not much of a story, I know, but I really do wonder what the 2 large men would want with a 5'3" petite woman like myself. The worst part of the story is that I really believe I saw the same men in a different parking lot just a few days later. They were parked already and took no note of me, as I luckily sped off into the night. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I'm back at Enterprise. Well, it's the day I have to give the car back, and I'm dreading it. I should also mention that I really don't know anyone in the state of California, and I'm 2,000 miles away from my hometown. I knew that I'd be stranded at home from then on out until I found a car. Sitting at home without any weed can really be a major crisis in a time like this. The one lucky part of this story is there happens to be a dispensary about 3 minutes away from my complex. Well, I decided to take one for the team and walk there. I dressed head to toe, covering my skin. I also made sure to leave early so that there would be more people around. I even had a friend from home on the phone with me the entire time. Unfortunately for me though, this plan fell flat on its face. I walked 1 minute down the road to a gas station, and when I paused at the crosswalk, a dirty-looking man in a white truck made eye contact with me. His windows were rolled down, and he was paused at the stoplight. This is another time where I can be thankful for my intuition, as I just felt something wasn't right about that look in his eye. I stayed out until he drove out of sight, and then made my way, passing the crosswalk. I realized that the man had doubled back and followed me by truck. He made a U-turn and everything. His eyes were still attached to me as I ran back towards the busy gas station and through the busy crosswalk. To my amazement, he turned around yet again, just as I had. He passed me, but not before making that same eye contact with me again as he drove off. This time I stayed put and called for an Uber. Sometimes it's just more worth it to shell out the extra $6. Overall, The time here's been pretty rough, and I really wouldn't recommend moving to the state unless you have people you know here and a good place to live. Please stay safe out there.
Thank you for reading my story. I must start by saying this story falls about average or maybe even below average on the scary meter. But it was such a strange event that I found it discussion worthy. So maybe some of you will rate it high on that strange meter, and maybe some of you will just think it's lame. I lived in the third house at the end of a dead-end road just on the outside of a small town in Ohio. Many strange and dark things happened there. Maybe I will share those stories some other time. But one night, I was left perplexed by something I saw from my bedroom window. This old house did not have central air. Although I had a window unit in my bedroom, I'd like to shut it off and open the windows on cool, breezy nights. I loved listening to the sounds of nature. Surrounding the dead-end road were many miles of woods where I would see coyotes, raccoons, possum, and deer. These were everyday sightings. There were many times throughout many nights where the woods would go silent. I think most of you know when the woods go silent, there is likely a predator of some kind nearby. One night I had my windows open. It's after midnight sometime, and I'm just browsing Pinterest on my phone when the woods go silent. It seemed like it was 5 minutes or so before I noticed how long everything had been silent. You could even hear a pin drop. Normally, when the woods go silent, it was never for more than a couple of minutes. Being curious and wondering if coyotes were sniffing around my front porch again, I got up and looked out my bedroom window that faces the front of the house. Now, at this time I can't remember if I had started listening to these kind of podcasts or not, so I'm not sure if I had ever heard the stories of wendigos or not deer creatures. Listening to one of the Swamp Dweller podcast shows made me remember this event and realized what I saw may have been one of these creatures. For context, the road at the front of my house was paved and went straight until it widened off into our driveway to the left, and the other portion went straight ahead to the right and turned into a dirt and gravel road. Then I looked out the window. Everything was silent, and I was surprised to see what appeared to be a very large and lonely buck walking down the middle of the road towards the dirt road and straight ahead. I watched for it, finding it strange that it was all alone. Normally when you see one deer, there are at least a few close by. As I watched it walking towards the dirt road, I thought it looked strange. First off, I'll be honest, I'm no hunter, but this buck looked massive, 2 or 3 times larger than what might be considered average. Not only was it large, but the way it walked, like it was being worked like a string puppet, or like it was in a trance, or maybe even how a soldier would march. It never turned and looked at me. I never made a sound. I just stood there, rubbing my eyes trying to figure out what the heck I was seeing. I was 100% sober during this, just a heads up. Before it reached the point where I couldn't be able to see it from my window, I looked around. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was trying to see any other deer to rationalize what this was. This was only for a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. There was no way it could have left my line of sight so quickly. That's when I realized I never heard its footsteps. It never made a sound. Just the woods came back to life right then and there, and I almost jumped out of my skin from being so spooked. I just stood at my window, feeling bewildered. What the hell did I just see? Whatever it was definitely not a deer. This thing made the forest, which was usually very loud at night, go dead quiet. The way it walked, its size, how it just disappeared. The whole situation was just so bizarre. I thought about telling my roommate what I saw, but he was not a sensitive person and not a big believer in the unknown or the paranormal. Although a year or 2 later, when the house was being renovated, he started to believe. But hey, that's another story entirely. So there it is, my potential not deer sighting. Like I said, it's not the scariest story, but it's a head scratcher. Do any of you have a similar story? Can anyone tell me what they think I saw, or what they think the not deer was doing marching down the road just to disappear?
I feel like if I had made a sound or engaged with it, the situation may have escalated. I was always under the impression that there might be a portal on the property for spirits or unknown things to come and go through. Is that what the Not Deer was doing? Just taking the portal back to hell for a dinner engagement with Satan?
This is an experience my wife and I just had this past year. As soon as the quarantine was lifted in our area, she and I filled our packs and went for a hike at our local state park. It was something we used to do pretty regularly and have since before we got married. Speaking for myself, I was really looking forward to it. The plan was to hike out to a certain lake, spend the night, and hike back to the car. It was a clear, warm day and the trails were nice and dry. For most of that morning, we had been the only people on the trail. We decided to stop for lunch at a campsite about halfway to the lake. Another couple must have had the same idea. They were sitting at the concrete picnic table and we asked to join them. Soon, the four of us were discussing what we had seen and where we were headed. The couple turned out to be newlyweds on their honeymoon. My wife, who's a hopeless romantic, loved to hear this. She proceeded to tell them how we'd met and some other sappy stuff I don't bother to remember. 2 hours passed and we finally said our goodbyes. We arrived at the lake about an hour before dark, tired and hungry. I got a fire started and Mandy, my wife, cooked us a small meal while I pitched the tent. We sat around the fire cooking s'mores and eventually called it a night at around 10 p.m. I got up just before dawn the next morning and got the fire ready to make the breakfast. We repeated our roles from the night prior, except I pulled the tent down and repacked it. All the measures were taken to ensure the fire was completely out after cooking, and with that, we took to the trail for the return journey. At 10 a.m., we reached the halfway point, but chose not to stop. 2 hours up the trail, we ran into the husband of the couple we'd met the day before. Strangely, his wife wasn't with him. Mandy asked him about her location, and the man said that she'd become ill the night before and returned home. When he said it, he looked nervous and couldn't look either of us in the eyes. Before either of us could ask anything else, he said that his wife had insisted he finish the trip alone. It sounded a bit strange, but we had no reason not to believe him. A group of people came walking up about that same time, and the husband excused himself to talk to them. I wasn't interested in prying any further. Their marriage was none of my business, I thought. Mandy looked like she wanted to stay, but I reminded her of the obligations we had that night. She reluctantly agreed and we went on our way. We got to the parking lot not too long after and packed up our stuff. There were a few groups of people talking amongst themselves. As we pulled out of the lot, several more cars, including a ranger's truck, were pulling in. Once again, I thought nothing of it. We made it back home that afternoon and handled some family things. It wasn't until breakfast that we heard the news. I had grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down in front of the TV. I flipped it on just in time to receive a report of a dead female camper. When they showed her face on the screen, I almost choked on my coffee. It was a picture of the woman we had met just 2 days prior. I yelled out to Mandy to join me in the living room. I wanted to be sure of what I was seeing. I didn't have my glasses on at the time, and I pointed at the TV and asked, "Isn't that one of the newlyweds we met at the park?" She watched for a moment and let out a shocked gasp. Just then, a wedding photo of the couple appeared on the screen. Mandy grabbed the remote from my hand and turned up the volume. According to the husband, the couple had been at a cliffside that was a popular lookout. Mandy and I had been there once or twice ourselves in the past. They had watched the sun rise, and as they were preparing to turn and leave, the wife lost her footing and fell several hundred feet to the ground below. It was certainly possible, but something bothered me about it. Why hadn't he mentioned this to us? More so, what was up with the illness story? It couldn't have been more than a few hours after the incident had occurred. None of his behavior made any sense. I know if something such as that happened to me, I'd have been a mess. We had passed at least 15 people that morning and not a soul talked to us. It all seemed fishy to me. I was glad to see that Mandy agreed with me. It looked as if though her instincts had been right once again. Just don't tell her I said that. After a long discussion about our responsibilities and the like, we agreed that we should contact the law enforcement involved in the case. And as it stood, the husband isn't under any suspicion. Not publicly, anyways. I contacted the sheriff's office and told them what we knew. The deputy put us on hold for a moment, and when he returned, he said someone may reach out to us in the future. But it's been almost a year and no one has contacted us. And this is what brings me to emailing you here. What do you think? My instincts and my wife's tell us that a crime may have occurred. We, however, have no proof or any real justification for our feelings. And that's just what they are, feelings. Certainly if law enforcement believed we had something to offer, they would have already contacted us, right? I don't want to be a nuisance, nor do I want to cause trouble for a grieving man who by all appearances is a decent person. But help me out here. Should I keep pushing or leave the police to do their jobs? I just can't shake this nagging feeling that a man is getting away with cold-blooded murder. Okay, so little side note here. Has anyone else noticed how nice the weather has gotten since the lockdown started? God, it's been so frustrating. Shut indoors while the weather went from gray and windy to warm and sunny like, well, must have been a matter of days. In all my life, I've honestly never seen spring slam into winter with such a dramatic transition. It's been tough on my little girl, too. She's been dying to get out to the local park to play on the jungle gyms, and telling her no, not to mention explaining why, has been harder and harder as the weeks have gone by. I can't tell her the truth because I knew it would absolutely terrify her. Breaking down, there are little creatures living inside of us, waiting to be transmitted to someone she loves like Pap-Pap or Nana, which could end their lives. How do you even say that to a child without them totally freaking out? So, our story starts with bird watching. I know, boring, but try telling that to my daughter. She burned through all her DVDs and favorite YouTube channels in like a week, and despite some of them having palpable rewatch value to them, she quickly grew tired of staring at a screen for hours on end. It got way worse, and we started having to tell her no about going to the park. Seems like once you hold something out of reach of a kid, it's all they want from then on, the forbidden thing. I found a happy compromise with her, in that if she stayed inside, she could look at the garden all she wanted. And the bonus was that if she stayed super still and quiet, that all kinds of birds and other critters would wander into the garden for her to look at. And you know what? It actually got kind of fun after a while. I actually fished out an old native birds of the upper American East Coast that I'm pretty sure was my grandpa's at one point, and we got to work ticking off each one we saw, working our way through the book as common and rarely seen birds alike landed among the flower beds of our backyard. One evening, I'd swear I saw something larger moving around the trees at the back of our yard, but I figured it was just a trick of the light, maybe a neighbor's dog moving against their back fence, casting shadows into ours. But a few days later, I discovered it wasn't just my imagination. I was doing some laundry upstairs while my daughter busied herself with bird watching. I'd ordered a cheap pair of kids' binoculars from Amazon, and those things really had paid for themselves by the evening of the day they arrived. My kid was obsessed with them. She had them practically strapped to her face for the entire day, looking at everything and anything up close and being amazed at the results. So she was only happy to sit in front of the patio window doors and while away the hours by checking out the wildlife at close range through her new binos. And thank God, because having to keep an eye on her day in and day out was meaning housework was mounting up, and at the top of the list was laundry. So I'm working through piles of dirty clothes, calling down to her every so often to see how she was doing, and everything seems to be going fine. Every so often I'd rush down when she claimed to have spotted a new kind of bird in our garden. Often I'd have to point out that it was one we'd seen before, but once or twice we actually locked eyes with a lesser spotted woodpecker, a bird we most definitely hadn't spotted before. Only when I heard her cry out, "Kitty," I figured she must have gotten kind of bored of watching for birds. At first I was a little worried. the last thing I wanted was for my little girl to witness a full-on bird murder in our own backyard, but I was quietly reassured by the fact that all the neighborhood cats were fat and spoiled and they wouldn't be finessing at backyard birds anytime soon. That was for certain. Suddenly I heard a kind of thump against the window doors, like my daughter had hit her hand against the glass super hard. I called down to tell her not to hit the glass as it would scare all the birds away and they might not come back to visit. Her answer made me drop the laundry basket and hurtle downstairs. I didn't. It was the kitty. But that thump was loud, bigger and louder than anything a simple house cat could make. It was so weird to write back now, but I distinctly remember just not thinking at all, just sort of flying into action, this white-hot urge to protect, just turning me into more machine than woman. And what do I see the moment I turn the corner into the living room? I see my daughter, standing at the glass doors, staring at an actual mountain lion in the face. The huge cat had its paw half cocked, as if I didn't already have an idea that it was the one making that banging noise against the glass. I ran toward my little girl with such speed and aggression that the mountain lion jumped back for a second. The inherent danger of the situation, danger that she seemed to be completely unaware of previously, caught up with her and hit her like a freight train. She started bawling, screaming, realizing in a white-hot moment that Kitty didn't want to play. Kitty wanted to rip and tear. That the kitty wasn't a kitty at all. Once it realized I'd taken away its intended prey, the mountain lion took a few more swipes at the glass and only rushed out the backyard once I started banging pots and pans together real loud, just like my grandpa had showed me years before. I guess this was just a long-winded way of saying to keep a real close eye on the woods and green spaces when this lockdown is over. It might not be entirely safe for our kids to be playing in places that have obviously been reclaimed by wildlife, and dangerous wildlife at that.
I am a driver for DoorDash. This happened just a couple of months ago. It was a Thursday night and I was working late. I typically worked until 2 a.m. on Thursdays, and they would be a pretty good money-making night for me. It was late and I was almost done, but at about 1:30 in the morning, I got an order to pick up. It was at McDonald's and it was just a medium drink. It seemed a little weird to me that somebody would have just a drink from McDonald's delivered, but I wasn't going to question it. I went to McDonald's and picked it up, then I drove to the destination. It wasn't that far, between 5 and 10 minutes away, but when I got into the neighborhood, I could see that it wasn't the best area. The houses looked very run down and old, and the grass in most yards was very long. I turned onto a dead-end road and finally reached the address. It was at the end of the dead end, and I could barely see the house because of how dark it was, combined with how many trees they had in the yard. There was a woods surrounding the house, and no street lights or house lights. I slowly stopped my car and got out. I looked around. It was very quiet. I walked to the end of the driveway of the house and looked down it. It was skinny, but fairly long. It had pine needles and sticks all over it, and looked like it didn't get much use. I looked down and saw the house, and then I began walking. I got about 10 feet down the driveway, and then I heard the branches in a tree next to me start to move. Immediately when I heard the sound, I knew it couldn't have been an animal and had to be a human. Without even thinking, I placed the drink on the ground, turned around, and ran back to my car. As I was running, I heard movement behind me, but I didn't stop to look. I ran all the way back to my car and got inside. When I did, I immediately started my engine, and the lights to my car came on. Out of my windshield, I saw in front of my car about 30 feet away, there were 3 men. They were not chasing me anymore, but they were just standing at the end of the driveway looking at me. Then one of them turned and threw the McDonald's drink at my car. It hit the ground about 5 feet in front of my vehicle. I backed up my car and drove away. I hope I don't have to deliver to that neighborhood again.
Okay, so this might sound like a bit of a weird one, because not like a spooky story. Our Airbnb wasn't haunted or anything, and I don't believe in stuff like that to begin with. But when me and my girlfriend stayed at an Airbnb in Belgium, something happened that creeped us out so much that we had no choice but to leave the apartment and check into a hotel. I've had a mate of mine tell me I overreacted over this, but just put yourself in my shoes. First proper morning of our little weekend getaway to Bruges. Me and the old ball and chain are getting ready to go out for breakfast when we realized that neither of us had packed any toothpaste. It was one of those I figured you'd do it kind of things. But it was no big drama since we could just brush our teeth and help ourselves to sketchy mints the owners had left for us. But I do remember my girlfriend looking around in the bathroom just in case the owner had left us any and saying some throwaway thing like, "I wish they'd left us some toothpaste." Boring, I know. I'll get to the point. We go out for breakfast, have our wander around Bruges, grab some toothpaste, then head back to the Airbnb. That night, I go to take a shower before bed and saw that my girlfriend had picked up the weirdest toothpaste that I've ever come across in my entire life. Honest to God, it looked like something you'd get out of a Second World War ration pack with this eye-watering old-fashioned menthol smell to it. I have my shower, walk back into the bedroom where my girlfriend is half asleep, and I kinda poke fun at her for buying vintage toothpaste. She's knackered and half asleep like, "What are you on about?" telling me to shut up and go to sleep, etc., etc. I had a wee giggle to myself, then got into bed and tried to get some sleep. It was the weirdest thing because how did she not realize she'd picked up such weird old toothpaste? And that's when it hit me. She didn't. She didn't realize because she didn't buy it, which means someone else bought it and then put it in our room, which meant that someone was listening to my girlfriend when she was in the bathroom, and it's not like the place was small, and the bathroom was near the front door to the apartment or something. God forgive anyone who wake up my missus in the middle of the night, but I decided the circumstances warranted waking her up. She was annoyed at first, telling me to leave her alone, but once I explained the situation, she just sat up rigid in bed, like completely freaked out. We racked our brains as to how someone might have heard us, but couldn't come up with anything. Like I said, the place wasn't small and the walls were pretty thick. So how had someone heard us? The landlord lived miles away, and as far as we knew, no one else had keys. It's something that bothers me to this day, to be honest. But I still can't work out how someone heard us. And I did ask the landlord about it, who told me no one had been in the apartment. We were convinced it was him, though, enough to just pack our stuff and leave. I know he hadn't exactly brandished a knife at us or anything. What happened would most likely make for a terrible horror movie, but like I said before, put yourself in my shoes. Someone is listening to you when you go to the toilet, and for all you know, they're watching you too. And God knows why they're doing it, but it can't be a good wholesome reason. 1,000 nopes, seriously. Just thinking it over had me and my girlfriend getting out of there. It didn't ruin the trip too much, like we realized early what was going on, so I think we got off quite lightly. The extra hotel money was the real scary part, though.
A couple of years back, I worked as a Postmates delivery driver on the weekends. I lived in a city at the time, so I could ride my bike to make the deliveries. I liked it because I could get more exercise. One night, on a nice Friday night in the summer, I was working for a few hours. I remember it was sunny and warm. At about 8 p.m., I got a delivery for an order of a sub restaurant. I rode my bike and picked it up, and then I rode to the address. When I arrived at the address, it was an apartment building on the edge of the city next to a park. I got off my bike and walked up to the front door. After a couple of minutes went by and nobody came, I texted the man and said I was there. A few seconds later, I got a response. He asked if I could bring it up to his room on the second floor, and he said he would buzz me in. I didn't mind at all, and I said that I would. The man let me in, and I walked up the stairs to the second floor and to the room he told me. I knocked on the door. The man opened it and smiled. He seemed very friendly. He said thank you to me and mentioned that he would give me a nice tip. Then I heard a woman's voice say thank you as well, coming from inside the room. I said no problem, and I left. Then I walked back down and outside of the apartment to my bike and continued with my deliveries for the evening. About 2 hours later, I got another delivery near the same area, and my route took me past that same park. But as I rode past the apartment building, I noticed an ambulance and several police cars outside of it. I was going to ignore it and ride past when I caught a glimpse of the man that I had delivered to. He was being led into a cop car. I had to stop my bike quick and ask what happened. I didn't get much information, but I did hear that a man had nearly killed a woman. Later, when I went home, I found out that the very same man I had delivered to was with a woman that night that he met for the first time, and he tried to force himself on the woman, and she resisted. That started a struggle between them, and the woman ended up breaking her arm and being knocked unconscious. The man was arrested, and the woman was taken to the hospital. It's crazy to me that I delivered to them, and they both seemed so happy just a few hours before.
When I was 14, my high school thought it would be a good idea to take a bunch of us New York City kids into the Catskills for a day. The idea was to introduce us to nature, since some of us had spent our entire lives living in the concrete jungle that is New York City. Seriously, a lot of us had only ever seen forests and farms on the TV or in movies, and now that I'm older, I realize how potentially damaging that is. I honestly feel like human beings are supposed to be in contact with nature, that it makes us happier, healthier, and gives us a sense of place. But I'll quit my rambling and get on with the story. So one super early morning, we load onto our school bus for the drive out into the Catskills. This is in like November too, so it was still dark when I got up, and the sun had barely risen when the driver got us on the road. I was excited at the time. I had aspirations to be in the military, and the idea of getting to wander around the woods was such a cool concept to me at the time. In the end, it actually turned out to be pretty boring and really tiring. We walked for hours and hours with our teacher telling us about different kinds of trees, animals, and weather systems that the area was home to. But we didn't even really get to see any of those animals aside from the odd squirrel that was squirreling away nuts. It turns out some of them don't hibernate at all, unlike a lot of woodland creatures. Like I said, it was all much more boring than I first thought. That was right up until I saw something carved into a tree. It was carved in really deep, obviously with some kind of knife or something, right through the bark and into the wood. I'd never seen anything like it before, and it wasn't like I wasn't a smart kid. I used to read about different religions and occult stuff quite a lot, so I was pretty confused as to what it was. To describe it, it looked like a rough figure 8, but with like dots and lines carved around it in certain places, so that it kind of looked like an octopus, only not at all at the same time. I know that makes literally zero sense, and I wish this was when camera phones were a thing, because I'd probably still have the pictures with me to link people to. Out of curiosity, I call my teacher over and ask her if she recognized it. She gives the thing pretty much the same look as I figured I had, just having no idea what she's looking at, then obviously tells me no, that she's never seen anything like it before. But that in all likelihood it's something a hunter carved into the trees so they wouldn't get lost. I'd not really heard of anyone doing that before, but I kind of figured she knew best, so I dropped the whole thing and just followed the group as we walked on. After a little while, we ended up walking right to the edge of a cliff face near a mountain. It was this huge wall of rock that just seemed to rise up out of the earth, covered in moss and stuff. Our teacher starts pointing at the rock and telling us how we can tell how old it is by the different kinds of rock that the thing was made up of, but few of us were really listening. I only really started paying attention myself as we walked along the cliff face, and I saw something familiar on it. Something big, too. It was the same symbol we'd seen carved into the tree, only like I said, this one was much, much bigger. Again, I showed our teacher, only this time, she didn't seem so calmly curious, and she seemed as freaked out as I did. Not only that, but the entire class saw it this time, but with it being the first time seeing it, they weren't nearly as scared, just the same curious I was. I asked the teacher quietly who might carve something like that into the rock, who might have the time or the skills or the equipment. She just told me she didn't know, but not to mention the ones that we'd seen carved into the trees. Plural. She used the plural, and it honestly scared me more than it should have. I'd only seen the one carved into the tree, but she'd obviously seen a lot more than I had. I just found myself hoping we'd be heading back soon. It was early afternoon by that time, and I wondered just how scary the woods would be after dark. Thankfully, I started heading back towards the bus not long after eating lunch. A little while into our walk, one kid stops the teacher and tells her he needs to go to the bathroom. It wasn't an ideal situation by any means, but with the kid being a dude, it was pretty easy to remedy. Teacher just tells him to go into the bushes nearby and deal with it, so he does. A few minutes later, we hear him tearing through the bushes back towards us, panting as he ran. He emerges with this terrified look in his eyes, like I've never seen anyone so scared before, not in real life. The teacher runs over and starts asking him what the deal is, but he can hardly get his words out. He just keeps breathing real fast, in and out, like rocking back and forth on the spot like he was losing his mind. The teacher is telling him to breathe, calm down and focus, and tell us what he saw. What he said shook our group to the core. There was a man, a real old man, or not so old. He had white hair and a beard, and he didn't have any clothes on, but he was covered in like tattoos. Oh my God. Oh God, what if he saw me? What if he's following us? The teacher had to quiet the kid before a full-blown panic attack took over the group, and we hurried back to the bus without stopping to look at anything at all. Nothing else happened on the walk back to the bus, but thank God. But I remember being really curious as to what the kid thought he saw when he went to the bathroom, and I foolishly asked. He told me exactly the same thing, only went into a little more detail about the tattoos and stuff. I asked him if he remembered what they looked like, to draw on one of them if he could. He took out a notebook and pen, closed his eyes for a moment so he could really recall. Then he drew something rough that I couldn't quite make out at first, but when he showed it, it was clear. It was a bunch of dots and lines, with a clear figure 8 in the middle.
This story is from a female's perspective. To preface, I was about 25 years old when this happened. My boyfriend and I had been out visiting with friends, and we left their house late, around 2 a.m. Now, I've never been much of a drinker. I was addicted to opiates at the time, but that's neither here nor there, so I did the driving. On our way back, we decided to call in some omelets from the Waffle House, which is the only place where we can get takeout in the super early morning. We arrived at the Waffle House and I went inside to pick up our orders. As I was paying for the order, a young man to my left began pacing and mumbling angrily, muttering something I couldn't understand. I didn't really think much of it, since most diner patrons are either drunk or truck drivers at that time of day. When I collected the food and turned to leave, I noticed a young woman outside of the diner. She too was angrily pacing back and forth, grimacing and cursing. The young man followed me out into the parking lot. I sidestepped the woman to get to my car. The young man had gotten into another car, and the young woman sat in the passenger seat. Whatever, I thought. Tweakers. The car with the two tweakers screeched to a halt behind my car, pinning us to the parking spot. Within seconds, the man was knocking ferociously on my driver's side window and yelling at me. My boyfriend and I exchanged what the fuck glances, and I rolled down my car window about an inch. The conversation went something like this. You stole my girlfriend's wallet, and you better give it fucking back right the fuck now. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have my own wallet, that's it. You fucking stole it from the counter, and we're getting it back, one fucking way or another. Dude, I didn't steal shit. Move your car or I'm going to back into it. You give it to me right now, or give me yours or you're fucking dead. I rolled out the window and backed my car up a few inches. He continued to scream at me through the window, then leapt back into his car with his girlfriend. They peeled backwards and exited the parking lot. At that point, my boyfriend and I were amused more than anything else, and we re-entered the highway. Just then, we heard the same car roar up behind us. The man was driving like an absolute maniac to dodge other cars, traffic lights, and stop signs, until he got so close to us that their car nearly rammed into our back bumper. I weaved in and out of the sparse traffic as safely as I could in an attempt to throw them off our route. Each time, he managed to pull up behind us again. He clicked his brights on and off and leaned on his horn. Inside our car, it was blinding and deafening. I sure as hell wasn't going home so that these tweaked, unhinged people would know where I lived. I swear it was almost like I could still hear him screaming, even over the blaring car horn. My boyfriend and I didn't do much talking, as I suppose we were both shocked and trying to figure out what to do. Fuck this, I told him. We're going to the police station. I doubled back, the car still bearing down on us. When I pulled into the police station, they followed. I locked my car doors. I picked up my cell phone and began to ring the station, because I sure as shit wasn't going to get out of my car. The man practically ran out of his car up to my window, again, banging and yelling. At this point, I had gone way beyond concerned and scared to absolutely pissed. I'm on the phone with the cops right now. If you don't have it, I guess you don't have it. He then sprinted back to his car with his sour-faced girlfriend and burnt rubber out of there. I stayed in the police station parking lot for a while, talking to the cops on duty. When we finally left at about 3:30 a.m., I still made several loops through our town before eventually heading home, arriving after 4 a.m. Legally, nothing came of the incident. I had no idea what the couple's names were, nor did I get a license plate number. We gave the cops descriptions of their physical appearances and vehicle, but they seemed far more interested in making sure I wasn't drunk. Thanks, fellas. I'm fairly certain that the maniac couple was pulling a strong-armed con job, or they were actually convinced that I'd mysteriously and magically stolen the girl's wallet, even though they were pacing and muttering as soon as I'd entered the diner, and even before I paid for the takeout, and that methamphetamine psychosis was responsible for the bizarre severity of their behavior. Anyway, fuck those assholes. My omelets were cold and rubbery by the time I got home.
So, for some backstory, I moved from a very small town to a relatively large city. It was for university, and I was around 19 years old. Since I wouldn't be in the new city until around September, my soon-to-be roommate decided to look for a place for us to live in the fall. In mid-July, she finally found us a decently priced, newly renovated, close to everything apartment. It was on a pretty busy road in the city. Fast forward to September when it was time for me to move in. Myself and my parents get to the building, and it looks a bit disheveled from the front, and upon entering, the inside of the building was an absolute mess. Appliances in the hallways, plaster was running up and down the walls like a child had been given the material to play with, and the flooring was missing in most places. Since the apartment was actually kind of nice, and since it was my first ever apartment away from home, I was absolutely thrilled to finally have a place of my own. Now, this apartment housed many students, as well as the landlord and the superintendent, so it seemed like a relatively safe place to live, right? Wrong. My roommate had the door buzzer hooked up to her phone so that when someone rang, her phone would ring and she had the option to let them in or not. About a week after school had started, I was home since I didn't really have class until later in the day, and my roommate was at work. She texted me to let me know that someone had tried to buzz into the apartment, and when she answered, all she heard on the other end was an unfamiliar voice practically screaming,
"Let me in! Let me in right now!"
Luckily, my roommate had the sense enough not to let them into the building. About 10 minutes later, someone comes banging right on my door. Without saying anything, they just continued knocking for what felt like hours, although it was probably only about 20 minutes in reality. I stayed in my room the entire time with the door closed because I was absolutely so afraid of who might be standing outside my door. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and when I checked the peephole, the person was gone. I felt really relieved that I had avoided what seemed to be some kind of creep looking to get in my apartment for some reason that I really wasn't aware of. Nothing too strange happened again until about 2 weeks later. Again, I was home since I was sick and my roommate was at work. I should note that my roommate was a flight attendant for a small airline, and obviously she wouldn't have her phone if she was already in the air. As I recall, there was no one to buzz the door this time. So it's early morning and not too long after my roommate left for work, and someone came banging on my door. Of course, I didn't get up to answer it because I was still sick in bed, hoping that they would just go away. We weren't expecting anyone, no packages or friends. And besides, how would they get into the apartment if my roommate's phone didn't ring for the door buzzer? When I finally think whoever was knocking at the door has left, someone actually unlocks the door to my apartment and walks right in. I was mortified. I always sleep with my room door closed, so there was absolutely no way that they would have known someone was in there except by opening the door. Since my roommate was a flight attendant, I knew it wasn't her because her flight would have been gone by this time, so there was really no way she could even answer her phone since there's no service when they're up in the air. I was frantically texting her to let her know that someone was indeed in our apartment without our permission. Where we live, our landlord must give 24 hours notice before entering the property. As I lay in bed crying and shaking out of pure fear, the person seemed to have just walked around the living room area and then left again. As soon as I heard the front door shut, I ran and locked all of the locks and put across the chain that would keep anyone from getting in, even if they had a key. To this day, neither me or my roommate know if it was the same person or someone who had previously lived in the apartment. We have no idea who it could have been. We left that apartment building only a couple months after that and moved into a more friendly and seemingly safer neighborhood. Whenever I drive past that building now, I always get the creeps. I don't think that I'll ever forget what happened.
This story happened in my freshman year of high school. I had recently moved to a new city and was unfamiliar with things. It was kind of tough for me being at a new school and having to make new friends and whatnot. One day, I had to make up a test, so I went to the history department to take it during my study hall time. And when I was done, I had to make it up to my next class, which was geography. As I was walking, I heard over the speakers that we were on a lockdown. I tried to hurry and make it to my class, but I guess it was farther away than I thought, and it took me a little longer than I expected. The hallways were already completely empty because classes were in session. I got more and more nervous the longer I was out in the hallways because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Then I saw a teacher come around a corner and see me. He looked surprised to see me, and I almost tried to run away, but I realized it would probably just get me in trouble. So I explained to the teacher I was just trying to get to my class. He said I shouldn't be out in the halls and that I was in trouble. He then told me to come with him, so I began to follow him down the halls. We walked to the end of the hall and down the stairs. Then he went to an exit of the school and started to walk out. I was a little surprised, but I figured maybe we were in a serious lockdown and we were supposed to leave the school. Just as we got out the door, though, the man grabbed my arm. Once he did, I got a terrible feeling. We walked a few steps into the parking lot until I heard a voice yell, "Hey," at us. Then someone yelled at the man to let me go. The man did and then took off running past the parking lot. Another teacher then rushed out to me and asked me if I was all right. I was fine, but very shocked at what had just taken place. The school stayed under a lockdown until they were able to make sure the area was clear. The school didn't have the best of security at the time, and the man had pretty much just walked right into the school. The scary part is, I don't know if he was ever caught. When I was a senior in high school, I worked as a pizza delivery boy. It was a pretty good paying job with tips, and I enjoyed it a lot. One night on a Friday, I was working and got a delivery for one pizza to a house on the other end of town. I made the drive to the house, which took about 10 minutes, and then I arrived. I stepped out of the car and started to walk up to the house. It was a small and average-looking house, kind of old, nothing eye-catching. I walked to the front door, but when I got there, I noticed a post-it note stuck to the door that said to use the back. I walked around to the back door of the house, which was located in the center of the house in front of a small fenced backyard with a little patio on it. I was about to knock on the door when I saw another post-it note. It said, "Please bring pizza inside." Now this made me a little bit uncomfortable, but I decided to go in anyways. I could hear music playing from inside the house. When I opened the door, I saw what appeared to be a kitchen. It was pretty empty though. There was no food or plates out, but on the kitchen table near the door, there was a Bluetooth speaker that was playing music. I started to place the pizza box on the table, and I saw yet another sticky note posted there. It said, "Bring pizza downstairs and I will give you your tip." I looked to the end of the kitchen and saw an open doorway with a staircase leading to a very dark basement. This is where I had to draw the line in my head. I decided I would have to skip the tip on this one, and I was not going to go down the stairs. I left the pizza on the table and started to walk away to leave. But then, the music on the speaker stopped playing, and a deep man's voice started speaking on it and said, "Stop." Then it said, "Why don't you come downstairs?" I wasn't going to stay there any longer, and I quickly opened the door and left. When I did, I could hear the deep man's voice laughing. I ran back to my car and drove all the way back to the restaurant. A few weeks later, when I was working, I got a delivery, and when I started driving, I noticed it was the address of that creepy house again. I really did not want to go back there, but it was my job, and I didn't want to tell my boss I was scared, so I continued driving. Once I arrived, I took a good look at the house. I could see a note was on the door again. I sat in my car for a good minute, hyping myself up to go back to the house. I finally got out and started walking straight to the back, but when I noticed the front door, the sticky note said something different on it this time. I walked up to the front door and looked closer. The note said, "Come in the front door this time," and then it had a smiling, winking face on it. I just dropped the pizza on the front step and knocked on the door 2 times and then left. I hurried back to my car, got in, and drove back to the restaurant again. Thankfully, I never had to deliver to that house again.
The story is told from the perspective of a male. Back when I was a sophomore in college at a college in Ohio, my friend and I were invited to a girl's house to drink a few cold ones. We weren't old enough to go to the bars yet, so we had said why not and then headed over. I should mention that back in the neighborhoods behind campus where the majority of students live is really notorious for people getting jumped and mugged late at night. However, my friend and I were in really great shape and we were the typical college meatheads, so we didn't really worry about this too much. Anyways, we get there with our typical 24-pack of Natty Light and see there are 4 girls but no guys sitting on the front porch. Pretty good ratio if you ask me. We threw our beers in the fridge inside and then joined them on the front porch. The beer was flowing nicely that night and we were all having a really great laugh. It was really shaping up to be a really great night. It had been about 2 hours and I was pretty buzzed, but I wanted to keep it going. I announced that I was going inside to grab another beer and my friend said he would go with me. I can't really remember what we had said inside, probably just who we wanted to take home for the night, but we were literally inside for not more than like 30 seconds. We step outside and literally all 4 of the girls are all crying. One of them was laying down by the sidewalk. We asked them what happened, and they had then indicated that about 4 guys with their face covered had actually ran up on them and robbed them. They apparently had airsoft guns, and when one of the girls wouldn't give her purse, they dragged her down the steps until she let go of it. My friend and I were so pissed off that this happened right under our noses. These guys must have been hiding and watching us for a really long time, and were waiting for the right opportunity to have the girls alone. I can't really say how this would have gone if we were on the porch when this had occurred, but I'm sure there would have been a fight. The cops were called and they took all our statements, but of course never heard any follow-up. The girls all canceled their cards shortly afterwards, and they had to get new everything, which is a real pain in the ass. A lesson learned with this is to never leave females alone late at night in that kind of environment. I actually got my own sister pepper spraying a stun gun when she went off to college, just so something like this never happens to her. So did the 4 cowards who waited till I went inside to attack the women. Be very glad we never met. Before my husband and I got married, we were living together in a mediocre apartment complex in a similarly mediocre part of the city. Now, it wasn't an especially dangerous place, but security at the complex was severely lacking. For context, I once had my car stolen right out of the parking lot in broad daylight without anyone noticing. Another issue with the complex's parking lot was its shortage of spaces. This was usually more of an annoyance than anything, but on one occasion, it had put me in very real danger. I was still finishing my degree at the time, and I had night classes that, in combination with an hour-and-a-half commute, left me getting home on most nights well after 11 p.m. Often I was lucky enough to find a space in the main parking lot by my building, but there were a few occasions when I found myself having to park in a much farther lot. The slot was very poorly lit, it had no buildings near it, and usually had very few cars in it. It was creepy in and of itself, but what really scared me about it was the extended walk from it. As a 21-year-old woman, I had already had plenty of experience with creeps, late-night walks, and unpleasant combinations of the two, but usually those walks were down a street or somewhere more public. Walking alone through this big, dark, empty lot really made me feel like sitting prey. No one had noticed when someone stole my car in the middle of the day. Why should I expect anyone to notice if something happened to me there in the middle of the night? With all this going through my head most nights to begin with, there was one evening in particular when getting out of my car just felt like a really bad idea. Now, I'm not a superstitious person, but my intuition was buzzing from the very minute that I unlocked my door. I'd only taken a few steps when I had spotted a man standing stock still right by the dumpster near my building. He didn't have any trash. He wasn't looking through it. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there looking at me. I was still all the way across the parking lot, but other than getting back in my car, there was no way around him. The dumpster was squarely in the middle of the 2 entrances to my building, so no matter which way I went, I'd have to walk directly toward him. My keys were already between my fingers, but I wasn't feeling very confident about whether this would help or not. I'm not a strong person, and I'm also only about 5'3". More than anything, I felt silly for being so afraid, but I knew in my gut something was wrong. This man had appeared out of nowhere. I'd driven past the dumpster on my way into the lot, and he hadn't been there. Also, I knew what everyone in my building had looked like, and there's absolutely no way that he would have had time to get there from another building between when I passed the dumpster and when I parked. As I got closer, it became increasingly obvious that I wasn't imagining the man staring at me, especially because as I got closer, he turned his body so that he was always facing me, kind of like a sunflower, just rotating in place, always watching me. Then came the moment when I had to pass him to get to the door. I felt really silly doing it, but I turned around and walked half backwards as I got close to passing him. I left a really wide space between us as I drew near by walking in the grass instead of on the sidewalk, but I still didn't want to turn my back on him. Eventually, though, I had to, and the second I did, I heard footsteps. Not just footsteps, but running footsteps. They were coming toward me and really fast, so I ran too. I sprinted to the building, ran up the steps to the door, entered the pen as quickly as I could, and then hoped to hell that he wouldn't be able to follow me. I didn't stop running until I got to my apartment door, 3 flights of stairs later. My neighbors were probably pissed about the noise, but I was terrified. The second I got in the door, I told my then fiance everything that happened between panic breaths, and he immediately called security. While he did, I went to go peek through the balcony window to see if I could spot the man. I couldn't. He was nowhere to be seen. When security finally arrived, they reported the same. No one was around. I still have no idea what the man was doing there before I got there or where he came from, and I've moved across town since then. But to that really creepy guy from my apartment parking lot, I really hope to never encounter you ever again.